I think that is time, so I think we will make a start. I can see the red light. Thank you, Ben. So thank you everyone for coming to this meeting of the Audit Committee. First thing to say, from a safety point of view, if no one's mentioned this before, or if we have new people in the committee, which we do today, I don't believe there's a fire drill plan. So if there is an alarm, we have to respond to it, and probably the safest exit will be the entrance, the main entrance that you came in on, and we would assemble in the rain between the cathedral and the Norman Arch. I hope it doesn't come to that. But thank you, everyone. In relation to welcome and introductions, in the interest of time, I don't always ask people to introduce themselves on the basis that we probably know most of us already, but I think that would be helpful today because we have a new member. And the most exciting news today, even if audit committees are not necessarily, and not to imply they're not always exciting events, is we have our new independent member, Joe. So could I actually ask you to introduce yourself, and then I'll ask each of the individual members of the committee to introduce themselves so that you know who's in your team. And before I do that, I should say, hello, I'm Councillor Rob Logan, I'm the chair of this committee. Joe.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'm presuming you can hear me because I can hear an echo. I'm Joe Williams. I'm joining you today as the new independent member of your committee. I'm based in South Wales. I live in Barry, and I have some experience on audit committees of about over 10 years. So I'm very pleased to be here and looking forward to getting to know you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. And could I start with Nick?
Thank you. I'm Cllr Coombes. I'm a member for Westbury and Henleys, and I'm the vice chair of the committee.
Councillor David Wilcox, representing Lockleys Ward.
Cam Hayward, Councillor for Null.
Councillor Ed Fraser, Green Party Councillor for Eastville Ward.
Ellie Freeman, Green Party Councillor for Bedminster.
Councillor Jonathan Hucker, I represent Stockwood Ward.
And Councillor Tim Rippington, I represent Brislington East Ward.
Tom Blenkinsop, Avonmouth and Lawrence Western Ward.
So I'm actually not going to ask officers to introduce themselves en masse, but if you are introducing or commenting on a report, I think it's useful to introduce yourself at that point. I don't believe we have any apologies for absence because everyone's here. And declarations of interest, this is an opportunity to announce anything that would potentially influence the debate. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a non-executive director of Bristol Waste, and that appears to be relevant for item 12 on the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. David?
Thank you, Chair, and I am a non-executive director of Cllr Hucker, which might come up, I'm not sure.
Any other comments? Brilliant, thank you. So moving to minutes of the previous meeting, which are part of the large pack. Forgive me while I get to that part of the large pack. Yeah, right. Right. Have any of my colleagues got any comments on the minutes? Before I ask whether they're accurate. Can I ask if they are an accurate record? Thank you, David. Good. Thank you very much. So, and moving to the action sheets, there are a couple of outstanding actions. Most obviously, Alison, the informal member briefing to be organised for disposal and insurance. Are they in the works?
I don't believe they finished their task and finish group yet. I was going to be alerted when that's complete, but I can chase it up after this meeting.
I think it would be Richard that we will be waiting for insurance. I don't know if that's separate.
We're acknowledging that there's an outstanding action, but we can bring that to a future audit committee. We can bring that
probably to the next one, October, I think we're looking at.
Thank you, Richard. Do colleagues have any comments on any of the other actions I've identified? Okay, great. So, moving to Chair's business, the most important action we've already referred to, which is the appointment of Joe as our new independent member. So, and Joe will chair the Values and Ethics Subcommittee when that meets. But the action following that, I wanted to ask a question of Andy, which is that we required 2 members, independent members of the committee. When we advertised, we weren't successful in appointing 2 appointable candidates. So I believe that role has been re-advertised, but I haven't heard progress on that. I don't know if either you or Simba have any information on what progress has been made there.
I think it's Tim who's leading this work. But Tim said that I will go back with an advert in the autumn. Yeah.
Okay, so the second advert didn't lead to anything. So we are going to advertise again. Okay. David.
Excuse me, Chair, but going back to the action sheet, point 7 talks about us getting a briefing on Cllr 61, when actually it's Cllr 60. We've been given the right briefing, but it's the wrong number.
So the risk relating to the social housing standards? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, David. Okay, so we will expect an update from Tim or for that advert to be proceeded. So we would have expected by the next meeting, we would expect at least that advert to have been placed.
Yes, I'll confirm with Tim and then
sure, I understand. Thank you. All right, that's brilliant. This now brings us to public forum. So we have a number of questions which members of the public have raised, answers included in the supplementary pack, and anyone who raises a question has the option of up to 2 supplementary questions. So that's what we will move to now. So the first question came from Suzanne Audrey. I don't see Suzanne here, so I don't think that we're expecting a supplementary from her. And the same, I believe, for the second person that asked the question, Mike Aldridge. But the third person is Dan Aykroyd, and he's in the room. So, Dan, you have the floor.
Thank you. So first of all, I believe you were going to. So this is a point of order. You were going to explain to me your decision to redact part of my statement for this meeting.
I would prefer if we dealt with the questions first and then the statements subsequent to that.
Okay. So supplementary question to my third question, which was about FOI requests. To be clear, I did not ask if email is a long-term storage solution. I asked if the policy of blanket deletion of emails is lawful. The answer given is not responsive to the question, which is particularly annoying because I have an FOI request that I was refused on the 3rd of May 2024 on the grounds that the council had had a definite plan to publish the information in the future, but it's not clear to me how this how the requested information is going to be published if it's been deleted. So I guess I'm going to have to ask my original question again: is a blanket email deletion policy lawful with respect to the FOI Act?
So thank you, Dan. I am conscious that we don't have anyone from legal services in the room at this time. My understanding is that the advice to council departments is that information that should be kept in the long term must not be kept on email only, and must be kept in storage solution which is intended for long-term or potentially permanent storage, and that information is kept in line with the records retention schedule. My understanding is that is the advice, and my understanding is that advice is lawful. I don't think there's anything, so that's as much as I think I can say.
Can I have a written answer to the very specific question of whether a blanket email deletion policy is lawful? Which
Yes, you certainly can.
Thank you.
So I think we do need to follow up to Dan's question now. I assume the answer will be yes, but that's you've asked for essentially a legal response. So I think I should probably ask my learned colleague before we publish that.
Okay, thank you.
You have another question, I believe.
Yes, again, supplementary to my question on one.
Okay.
The response given says this matter is currently the subject of an FOI request and will be responded to via that service. So I guess my supplementary question is, why, as chair, do you think it's acceptable to refuse to answer a question submitted here just because I've asked a similar but not identical FOI request elsewhere?
So I did ask that question myself. I wanted to know what was the standard approach for that scenario. So if a similar question is raised through a current freedom of information request, and then a similar question, not identical, but a similar question is raised to a committee, the advice I was given is that the FOI takes precedence over that, and that is partly because there is a statutory period of responding to freedom of information request which needs to be addressed, and we've got some papers later in the meeting on how and why that's so important. So I'm advised that is the usual practice in that situation.
I'll explain the difference for clarity. The FOI request is a request for documents that already exist within the council and for those records to be provided. The question I asked today that's not been answered is an explanation. It's different because it means that new information would need to be written by the officer answering the question, as opposed to just retrieving records that already exist. They're two separate questions that this committee's not... I'm a bit annoyed that I've not got an answer.
Okay.
So I guess my supplementary question is, well,
okay.
I would still like an answer.
So, okay. I think answering that substantively in relation to the question on the understanding of the housing judgment probably require a housing professional, I imagine. So I probably shouldn't speculate on the substantive question of when that judgment went from a score of 21 to a score of 28, and because I honestly don't know if that reflects purely a change in the application of a change in the law, which I think took place on the 1st of August, the 1st of April of that year, or whether it related to any other issue. So I think we'll probably need to get a written question after that. Nick, if you have a comment.
It occurs to me that we do have a substantive item on the agenda about the risk Cllr 60, so we will have, at some point in this meeting, an expert in that topic.
So you're completely right. This topic is that topic, so it may be possible to explore that issue later. If it's possible to answer your query in the meeting, then we'll try and do that. That may depend on the knowledge of the person who's presenting this issue. I don't know if they know that the point in time that Dan is asking that question. But that's a helpful comment, Nick. Thank you. Right. So I think that brings us to the end of the question section, and there is the second section of public forum, which is statements. Two statements have been published. One from a person called Jen Smith, who I don't think is in the room, but we thank her for her statement, unless she's hiding somewhere. And the second statement is from Dan. So you have two things to say. I think you fundamentally have your statement, but I think you also had some comments on the treatment of your statement.
Yes. I was told that part of my statement's been redacted. I asked you several questions via email, most notably, what power or other basis are you using as chair to redact that statement? I'd hope to have that conversation via email, but please can you explain why you have redacted it?
Thank you. And for the rest of the committee's understanding, so sometimes statements are refused if they are defamatory or if they are not within the confines of the responsibility of the committee. That did actually happen to another statement from another person, but my preference is always to publish, and is always to publish a statement, or as much of a statement as can be published. So, and in relation to Dan's statement, the beginning and the end of Dan's statement has been published, but there is some content in the middle of Dan's statement which has been redacted from the published version, and that is partly so. Factors taken into consideration in relation to that are whether that's the content of that section related to the committee's responsibility, partly that it related to questions that had been asked before, and we believe, I think, relating to 2023, which we believe have been answered in May of 2024, and also one part of the section did question the accuracy or lawfulness of someone's decision making, which is probably not something that we could have published. But we try to publish as much as we feel we can. And we do, believe it or not, err on the side of transparency. But is there anything else that you would like to say in relation to your statement?
Can you clearly say which part of your power as chair you said that it was removed at least in part because it wasn't within the remit of this committee? Where in the Constitution does it say you can do that?
So, section 9.5, and it relates to, so I think the power is the chair in consultation with the proper officer may reject a question, statement or petition if it is about a matter to which the committee has, if it's not about a matter to which the committee has responsibility, if it's defamatory, frivolous or offensive, or if it requires disclosure of confidential or exempt information, and it was the first one, so that it was not about a matter to which the committee has responsibility.
Okay, I'd like to speak to my statement then, please.
Of course.
Okay. I strongly disagree with what you just said. Part of the redacted statement is about the public interest test reasons that were provided for the choice to redact a report that was presented to this committee. Part of the statement is in relation to the statement you made at last audit committee and a discrepancy between what you said and what's been said by a senior officer elsewhere. Part of the redacted statement is in relation to the apparent lack of adequate training that officers have in handling FOI requests. Councillors, reform is coming. This council looks corrupt because you keep covering stuff up and it just looks terrible month after month after month. Why are you allowing this situation to continue? It's ridiculous.
Thank you for your statement, Dan. This concludes public forum. And, we have a comment on the public forum. Yes.
Sorry, I wouldn't normally, but I just wanted to ask, if something is redacted, is there a way that as members we can understand how that's been done? Because obviously we've just got the words in front of us and it's not clear that the text has been taken out. It just kind of makes it quite stilted. Obviously, I understand we can't see those words, but just having an indication to show that text has been redacted in certain places would be really helpful in future.
I think that's a really good point. As we have erred on the side of transparency in not refusing a statement, but refusing part of the statement, but I think you're completely right. It would be better if we marked redaction here and redaction there, so that you can see exactly, maybe not how long it was, maybe that's ideal, but you can see where a redaction starts and finishes. I think that's really helpful, and I would rather not redact statements. I would rather publish them unredacted, but if we do redact statements or questions as well in the future, I think that we should do that. And that's really helpful, Ellie. Thank you. Ed?
So, in the interest of transparency for this meeting, because we still, we will still expect there to be sufficient transparency, could we please be told during which paragraphs of the published statement, or between which paragraphs, the redactions took place?
Yeah. So the statement that starts first, and then to the end of the statement, and the matter should be considered closed. So the redaction starts there, and then the statement starts again at the statement. I actually do have some sympathy, so it is in the middle there. But I agree that it would be clearer if we can mark that in the future.
Councillors, you do have my words in your email for reference, and I strongly object to them being redacted. They are absolutely about matters that are going to be discussed in this meeting. They are on the agenda. This is disgraceful.
Thank you again, Dan. Thank you to councillors for those comments. So that is the end of public forum, unless there were any other comments around that. So the next item is our work programme. So this report is to note, and this is an indication of the items that the committee will take in its next few meetings. Are there any comments on that work programme? Okay, that's great. So I assume we can take that as noted. So the next substantive item is the internal audit report, which allows Simba and I think a number of your colleagues to report a number of issues. So there's I think we'll take each section by section. So there's an introductory report from Simba, and then there is a number of 5 appendices which relate to individual audit findings of limited assurance. And I think a number of your colleagues are going to introduce each of those items, but if I could ask you to introduce the general report.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take the report as read. So there are 2 elements to this report. At the moment, we are working on the 25-26 Q1 and Q2 priorities as agreed by the Audit Committee. But this report covers 2 elements. The first element that I want to discuss. So the first element that I want to discuss about is the implementation of the agreed management actions, which we report on a quarterly basis or every time we come to the Audit Committee. So the target is 90%, and at the end of June, it was 75%, and you'll recall that at the end of the financial year, it was 98%. So I think that given that we achieved 98%, it means that there is the willingness, the capacity and the capability to hit the target. So I think that's an area that we can still improve. We'll continue to work with management, and I would assure you that this is being prioritized. The most important thing that I can comment on is that most of the old items have now been cleared, but I think what is important is to make sure that the effort that was put in Q4 to get us to 98% needs to be sustained, and it includes also using the audit management system as a proactive way of managing the actions. That's the first point that I was going to make, Chair, on the agreed management actions. And then the next is that there are 5 audits with limited assurance opinions, and within that list there's also a report that the Audit Committee requested us to bring to this meeting, which is again on the agenda. I don't want to say anything more, but I would want to take any questions, if there are any questions about the rest of the report, except the limited assurance opinion.
So, any questions on that? Yes, Jonathan first.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions, one of which relates to the report itself, and one isn't actually mentioned in the report, but it is an internal audit matter. First question. Obviously, the reduction from 98% of agreed management actions that were implemented last year to 75% this year. That's quite a alarming deterioration in performance. Is there any sort of particular recurring theme which would explain that? Or is it because there was a big push to get the number up last year and some complacency has set in and that level of commitment hasn't been maintained?
I think it is very difficult for me to comment on that because it becomes subjective. But I think that what we have noticed in the past 6 months, and I think I'll leave Andy to add something, is that in the last 6 months there's been notable effort in terms of implementing agreed actions. But there are always challenges around, if you see the table that I've provided, so there are differences in terms of which directorates are doing better than others, but also some of it reflects probably the pressures in a particular directorate at a particular time. Because if you look at what we've given you throughout the last year, the previous quarters, they are not the same directorates which are struggling. Some actually are better than others. So I think that probably there are two elements. One could be, I think, if we could proactively monitor those actions using the system religiously and then embed the monitoring of these actions as part of just good performance discussions, not as a compliance process, but just as part of all the good management business, it will help. And I can see that there are some DMTs who are doing very, very well. We look at their actions on a monthly basis. But I don't think that it's a lack of effort. It could be a number of things, but I recognize we need to improve.
You have a second question?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for your response, Simba. Yeah, my second question is not something which is actually specifically referred to in the internal audit report, but it is an internal audit matter. I think that last year it was planned to carry out an internal audit on parking services, and that got delayed into this year. I wondered if you could give me an update on the status of that audit.
Thank you for the question. The audit is currently underway.
Thank you very much. Do you have an estimated completion date for that?
We are hoping to complete by the end of September.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
I think the next time is Tim and then David.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. The first question, Simba, it's been noted in previous reports that part of the problem with monitoring how much of this is getting done in terms of management actions was that people weren't inputting into the Pentana system. It's not mentioned here. Are we now confident that that is something which no longer contributes to poor statistics? I particularly note that the housing department here has a high percentage of the partially implemented and not implemented, and I'm wondering whether that could be to do with the fact that they've not had the same sort of level of training, or is it, are we confident that these statistics are all about how much work has not been done rather than how much has not been put into the system?
I think the problem with the use of the system was probably worse last year. I think there's been significant improvement, but I think it's still an issue. But I don't think it's as significant as it was last time. And I think, I'm not sure in terms of the main reasons in terms of why other departments are, but I would think that there's so much happening in housing, and I think in some cases it happens because of prioritization, that possibly people don't probably prioritize that because of other pressing issues. But I think the issue of system, I think, is still an issue that probably needs to be dealt with.
Do you have a second question?
Yes, yeah, thanks. Yeah, it also says on page 19 of the report, internal audit continues to explore opportunities for using technology to increase operational proficiency. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on what that might entail. And I'm particularly wondering if we're talking about AI here, and if so, whether you've identified any risks as well as potential advantages to using such technology.
Yes, so AI, absolutely, because I think that there's a lot that's happening now, but I don't think that the systems are mature that we can confidently say we're going to do this, but there's significant opportunity with that. But I also recognize that there are some governance issues as well as also stifling the human element to it as well. So we need to find the right balance between using AI, but also maintaining the professional judgment, professional skepticism, which then enables us to get a robust work. So what we'll do is, if we're going to make any significant changes, we'll bring a report to the committee to clearly establish and explain what we'd want to do. But yes, I've got ambitions to explore technology, because there are some systems that can write a report in 3 minutes, or and I take 4 days, 5 days. But yeah, that opportunity is there, but it will be governed well.
If you do ask ChatGPT to write your audit report for you, do check whether those audit references refer to laws or audits that actually happened. There has been some debate about that. David.
Thank you, Chair. Tim has already asked my first question. I'm really interested in the outliers of housing and growth and regen on table 2, and I think we've got a suitable answer for that. My other point was going to be that in the internal audit reports, the audit summaries, we don't get told which directorate is actually responsible for these issues. So could that be included in the future, please?
That's fine, Chair. That's fine. We just need to find a way. Then yeah, it's fine.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify, are we able to take any questions on appendices 1 through 5 at this stage, or are we just going to select an update at this stage?
Not 1 to 5 yet.
We'll come to that.
We'll come to that.
Fine, I'll hold off. I've got questions on...
The reason is we want the appendices 1 to 5 to be introduced by members of the audit team.
Great.
Before that happens.
Noted.
So, any other questions on the overall reports? No? Okay, great. So, we will move to... Oh, sorry. This is for future reference, Joe. This is the worst place to sit. So avoid sitting in Tom's place.
I'll do my best in future. Thanks for that, Chair. It's just a very small point in terms of, I was looking at 4.2, and internal audit testing of risk registers found no visible link between risk causes and mitigating actions. And I was just slightly bemused by that. And I wondered if you would be willing to elaborate a little bit further on that, Cinder, because that reads as though we've identified a risk and we're going to take actions, but the actions will have no actual bearing on what that risk is, and that sounds like that can't possibly be right.
I think that's...
I apologise.
Hold that thought. And you might not be the only person to have noticed that statement in Appendix 1. Does Andy want to comment on those actions?
On the outstanding audit actions? Yeah, we're making a good effort to make this a standing item on all of our management meetings. I guess my observation, moving from 98%, which is extremely good, to 75 is still good achievement at this point of the year. I think what probably will happen is, especially as we go into the holiday periods, you've got kind of audit actions that start timing. So what we've gone through is closing down all outstanding actions to get to 98%. As audits happen, new actions start popping up on the system. So you've always got a pipeline of actions to close off. I guess the improvement we need to now make is looking at the next 2 months ahead of those actions that need to be closed down and starting to plan them, and so we become a lot more proactive rather than reactive. But bearing in mind, at the moment we are going through the sort of summer holiday period, so our performance might be dipping a little bit whilst people take their well-earned leave, but we do need to make sure that we are being consistent in definitely closing down these actions when we have got the bigger gaps, which is across housing and GNR, as others have pointed out.
Okay, thank you, Andy. So we will move to the appendices now, and we will start with Appendix 1, which is on risk management, which I think is being introduced by Phil.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Phil Eames. I'm the Internal Audit Manager, excuse me, who has had oversight over most of these 5 reviews. The first one we are coming to is risk management. We look at certain aspects of risk management during each audit year. This year we have given limited assurance, and the areas we particularly looked at were governance over the processes, training, and also some of the management processes. In previous years we've reflected very much on the improvements that have been made, particularly in terms of the reporting processes that are in place, and we see regular risk registers being produced, brought to audit committee, and so on. However, this year we looked particularly at the key policies, which was the overall risk management policy, and also the Council's risk appetite statement, which drives the Council's appetite for risk. Those policies were out of date, and we found some significant instances whether they were not being followed in practice. We also found a lack of formality around risk management training that was in place, and looking at a sample of risks, we found that the mitigating actions that were provided when reducing the risk scores, in some instances, scores were remaining the same for a large period of time, and there were also risks that were exceeding risk tolerance levels, which was unacceptable according to the Council's risk appetite statement. So, as always, we produced our report. We got management responses. Risk management oversight sits within finance, and I think Andy and Aldo are going to respond and update on progress since we produced our report.
Just looking to Aldo and Richards. Who wants to start on this one? Yep, Richard will start and then hand over to Aldo.
Hello, Chair. I'm Richard Young. I'm Head of Strategic Finance, and I'm responsible for the risk management function, and I'll respond to the audit report. We accept the judgment of limited assurance, and we are to implement the relevant actions to address the concerns that were set out in the report. As Phil had pointed out, I split those concerns around and the risks around 4 areas. The first was around the policies and procedures and the fact that they haven't been reviewed for some time and need updating. Secondly, on corporate overall risk management training across the Council. Thirdly, the registers themselves and the specific weaknesses that had been pointed out from the registers, and we'll be able to address the question about causes and actions and having the appropriate action in place to address the causes. And fourthly, the area of challenge from risk registers into senior management forums such as Corporate Leadership Board, DMTs, and also policy committees. So in response to each of those 4 areas of weakness, firstly we're going to review the risk management plan and bring forward a revised policy. I must also point out at this point another change which will assist with improving the culture overall for risk management is the appointment of our new risk lead, Aldo Zanetti, who is going to support a drive for an improved embedded culture on enterprise risk management within the Council. So we'll be bringing updates on the policy and the risk appetite statement. With risk management training, we will apply a revised training programme working alongside HR so we can identify who should be trained and what groups and at what level and what frequency, and also apply that into new staff induction. And then thirdly, working with the department management teams and across the levels within the council, introducing a level of greater overall management assessment of the risk registers coming through to our layer, which is a bit less transactional, a bit more enterprising, a bit more responsibility overall on those weaknesses coming through. And then fourthly, on the risk registers themselves, acknowledging the specifics of those weaknesses on the samples, that we will be working with services and reviewing those as a team and bringing about a better embedded culture which our new risk manager will bring to us. So we accept the general inconsistent reporting, but we do acknowledge that we will need to refresh those and bring about an overall greater confidence in risk management.
And did you say you wanted Aldo to make some comments before we took questions from members?
Aldo, if you've got more to add, you're welcome to.
No, I mean, the only thing I was going to add was around the, I think the internal audit was very, very useful for me, sort of coming in last month, and effectively that's now informed our improvement plan. So I think, as Richard alluded to, moving away from the transactional form of risk management to something that is more real and meaningful on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. Thank you. So to ask questions from the comment, we'll start with Joe and then Ed.
Thank you, Chair. This doesn't just apply to this one, by the way. This comment applies to all of to the five. I'm having some difficulty linking up, you know, the issues, the management response, and then the progress. We have a lot of lists here, and I think it would be helpful to have it presented slightly differently so that we can see what issues the management responses are going to address. And, you know, there is a little bit, this is just a simple thing, but there are some suggestions in there that in the management response part, for example, the word adopted, you know, and yet then there's the progress bit, which you would expect to see the adopted word in. And during the 9-month plan as well, you know, the different milestones you have there and the headings, it's just not easy to see what issues this plan and this progress is addressing. And I will say it's not just this item, it's all 5 of these reports are unfortunately, I think, suffering from that. So it's more an observation and a suggestion for the presentation, really, to the committee of the information that I'm looking for. Thank you.
It's really helpful feedback, Joe. Thank you, and I can see the feelings of agreement amongst my colleagues. I don't know if Phil or Simple would want to say anything other than you'll take that back from this feedback.
So I think I'll take that. I think the element that we try to give you a balanced view in terms of what are the issues and what the management has said, and in the management response they articulate, but we can find a better way of probably getting to where you need to get to, but we also need to find the right balance between the amount of stuff that we put in within these reports for them to be meaningful, but we will try to improve. Yeah.
No, that's really useful feedback, thank you. And I think one of the challenges as well is that the principle is that you have an audit and then you have the management response, and the management response is supposed to address the issues identified in the audit and should be adequate and suitable. So if you have a management response that is less than 100% comprehensive, that doesn't really meet that requirement, and then you're as members, you're slightly uncertain whether all of the responses add up to all of the issues are identified. So that's really helpful, thank you. I think Ed was next.
Thank you. And firstly, thank you, Joe. This is why a fresh pair of eyes is incredibly useful. So a great first contribution to the committee. Thank you. Firstly, as a point of information, can I just ask what your name and role is, please? Because you haven't got a sign in front of you.
Yeah. Aldo Zanetti, Risk Manager.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Aldo. I want to echo a couple of things Joe said just around actually the accessibility and readability of this document. It is really important to remember these are documents for public consumption. I understand they involve deeply complex issues, but the readability and accessibility of the documents is something that really affects public trust in what we're all doing and what we're doing here across all these items. So I also wanted to pick out the 9-month action plan. At the end of page 25, the last bullet point says, there is a 9-month action plan which has been socialised at the executive risk management event. I mean, phrases like that, what do you mean by socialised? It's incredibly obtuse language, I'm afraid. And the graphic underneath, it is impossible to read that using a screen reader. So if I were a blind or visually impaired constituent, I would not be able to read that at all. So there are some basic accessibility issues with this document, which are also repeated in later items. I want to ask about opinion 3.3. So it says, the risk management process was not fully embedded in the council. There was an outstanding action from the risk management internal audit reports from 22-23 and 23-24 in relation to providing risk handling training to new starters and adding the requirement to the new starters induction checklist. Can I check what the reasons were why this was not added to the new starters checklist when it was first reported during the 22-23 financial year, and who will be taking responsibility for this action?
So thank you again Ed, for your comments on the report, and it's important that we support internal audits in that way. I think the answer to the question of who will be responsible, this comes under your responsibility.
I take on board, yes, Councillor, what you're saying, and it is acknowledged that we've had a degree of change across from those years when we had our risk lead at the time, and we needed to address those particular recommendations, but also it was another restart on risk management, and that needed to, we do need to get to the point where we had those particular elements being implemented, and that partly explained the changeover. So it's my service that takes accountability for that, and so we wish to implement that change, and as part of that change, the introduction of Aldo into the team should be able to address that and complete those actions so they don't come back again as yet another action that hasn't been completed.
Okay, thank you, Richard, and pound to Aldo.
So we'll now go to Nick and then David.
Thank you. I think what I find most concerning is the statement that there's inconsistent reporting and challenge to risk scores at divisional management teams. So my understanding of risk management is that we write down what we think our risks are, we try and quantify them, and do that in such a way that an outsider can see what is the biggest potential problem, so that we can choose to allocate our resources accordingly. That needs to be done at a uniform level so that our risk scores are comparable, and that means that all of our divisional managers need to be challenging those risks and making sure that they're doing that right. So I wonder if you could play back to me, is my understanding of risk management correct? And if so, what are we doing to ensure that our divisional managers are escalating risks in the way that they should?
Just to talk about it, so the reporting, firstly, I don't think there's a major issue with the risk system or reporting. They're being captured correctly. I think the point is around how we consistently across divisional management team meetings discussing risk and then what actions are being taken to manage those risks. So that is something that the audit's identified in terms of acting on that. That's one of the key priorities for Aldo in terms of attendance at director of management team meetings, so that risk conversation does become consistent with Aldo taking that kind of cross-council coordination approach. We're also acting on this by changing our approach to governance, so we're setting up a separate audit and risk board as well, so the feed-in of those risk conversations will go into a single board that keeps oversight of the whole risk register, the corporate risk register, and then what actions were taken, so it becomes more proactive risk management as well as risk reporting, which is necessary also.
Okay, thank you. David.
Thank you, Chair. So I hate to say it, but I've been on audit committee for nearly over 4 years now, and I've had various risk reports presented to me, and I can see that the way that risk has been dealt with within the council has evolved over those 4 years, and I'm grateful for that. But one of the things that I think is actually missing from this report is the concept of a risk owner. So how are risks allocated to particular owners, and what actions do those risk owners actually have to take to make sure that that risk is adequately maintained?
I'll put that one to Aldo, because it's a key one me and Aldo discussed when he joined the council.
So I think part of the challenge that we've got is we don't run a true sort of enterprise form of risk management at the minute. So in terms of risk owners, they do tend to work in relative sort of silos. Now again, as part of the improvement plan, what we're looking to do is introduce risk champions out in the council. So in each directorate, risk champion, that would be the eyes and ears, if you like, on a day-to-day basis. So it takes away that, I suppose, ultimate responsibility whereby it's the risk owner who's having to, at the end of the month or quarter, provide an update, whereby actually it's a bit more real and a bit more day-to-day.
Okay, so that's good. But is that going to be reflected as an action on this, that we need to have appropriate responsibility for the actual risk owner?
So is there responsibility for the risk owner? As in,
so that they are empowered to do things under their risk?
yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we've done recently is a maturity assessment in terms of identifying almost where the central risk management resource begins and ends, and the risk owner begins and ends. So exactly as your point there, what is their remit in terms of managing that risk? Yeah.
Good, that's gratifying to hear. And to follow up on Ed's point about this 9-month action plan which has been socialised at the Executive Risk Management event, can members have a copy of that 9-month action plan, please?
I'm sure we can. But if we can ask for that to be circulated to members, that would be helpful.
Just so we can have an appropriate level of assurance that things are happening.
Absolutely. Any other comments on this section? I'm just checking if Tom would like to ask.
I mean, I feel as though some of the risk registers were covered, though. It was quite concerning, as noted, that the point on the risk action, no visible link between risk causes and mitigating actions. And I assume that will be something that we're monitoring very closely going forwards, but any reassurance that could be given would be very helpful.
So I certainly acknowledge, and particularly that did come out strongly from the audit, to see that disparity, and a part to the solution of that is a in-depth review, including overall management oversight on those, and particularly to have that kind of clear line of sight as to if there's a cause, there needs to be an action, and that action needs to have deal with the consequence, so it's done appropriately. And in the event, it was helpful to us that auditors pointed those out, and that we were addressing through an overall review of those, that we keep the discipline of that principle of getting an action that relates to that cause.
Thank you. Could I just push that a little bit further? I think to all members that language is the most striking, that you could have a risk without a mitigating action, or a mitigating action that doesn't deal with the risk. Now, my assumption is it's part of your role to challenge those things and to not accept a risk register that isn't complete. Has that challenge happened? Have you been able to improve the quality of mitigating actions?
I'll just come in from a director of finance perspective. I think with risks, so some risks are known and understood and tolerated, because sometimes the risk is outside of the control of the council, because it could be a wider economic risk. However, I take the point when there's a risk identified that is a service-based risk, there should be a corresponding mitigating action and then an action plan with a timescale, and that is very much the conversation that Aldo will be having with directors when we're going through the departmental risk registers. So we have got that check and challenge process in place, because that is really important in terms of Aldo's role, in terms of working with services, but also assuring himself in the risk role for the council that the service is owning the risk and putting the mitigations
but that's a discussion that will be happening in the future. It's not a discussion that has happened yet.
I think the audit's identified, I think it's definitely happening already in places, but we can be better, and that's what we're looking to do.
Okay, thank you. Any other last comments on this, Nick, and then Jonathan, and then we will move to Appendix 2.
Yes, so to build on what Tom's raised, I think there is a link between a risk register, which is maybe padded by mitigations that don't seem to have any effect, and the lack of challenge from management. So I guess that there's a partnership that maybe you can talk us through between the risk owners, the departments that write their registers, and the central risk team that help them, and make sure that when it comes to mitigations, we're not just throwing stuff at the wall to make it look like we're doing something, but the contents of the register are actually relevant and useful. Otherwise it provides a very false sense of reassurance that we've got a problem, but don't worry, there are lots of things that we can do about it. But if those actions don't actually address the risk, then it's almost worse than not having the risk register, because it makes us feel like that there's a risk but it's under control, but that would be misleading.
Imagine, please.
So I think this plays into this transactional form of risk management, whereby the minute, from a reporting point of view, it's very much, as a risk man identified, has it been scored, is there a mitigating action, not actually looking at the quality or the effectiveness of that mitigating action. So again, the improvements that we want to put in place are exactly that, where actually it's that management input in terms of how effective is that mitigation, how effective are those controls. So again, it brings it to life, as opposed to more of a tick box, which I think is where we probably are at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for a very pedantic question, but when Ed asked the question what was meant by socialised in the context of the 9-month action plan, I don't think he got an answer. So I assume it means that it was agreed rather than discussed. I just wondered if that could be confirmed, please.
So the event in question was with Zurich, and it was kicking off effectively the working partnership with Zurich in terms of risk management. So we had senior execs from Bristol, from Zurich, and this is where this was actually sort of first put out there earlier this month.
Not sure if that answers the question, but I assume that the plan was agreed.
Yes, it was agreed and discussed. Yeah.
That's brilliant, thank you. David.
One more quick question, Chair. As this committee is actually responsible for evaluating risk of Bristol City Council, how come we didn't get an invite?
The main event in the meeting was talking about our insurance arrangements. So Zurich, as we have a relationship with them as our insurer, also have a risk professional. So it was an informal conversation about how we work in the future, because the more we understand, mitigate and minimise our risk, it actually has a better bearing on our insurance arrangements as well. So that's the context of the conversation. It wasn't a whole risk day workshop that would be an board invite, but in the future that is an option we could consider if we do continue work in the risk management space with Zurich, because they have risk professionals that we can access to our contracts.
So it's nice. Come back more. It's so exciting, risk management, isn't it? I can't stop you. Right.
So I do think it's a really important context for us to actually understand risk properly, that we do get extra training. It's a core part of the audit's responsibility. So yes, please do invite us and get us.
I think we have definitely shown the importance of risk management to members. So happily, we have opportunities to discuss this at each of our meetings, as we do bring the risk register in summary. But I think that's a helpful discussion. Ed, and then Joe, and then we will move to Appendix 2.
In the interest of pedantry, could we... I'll come to time. Can we update the word socialised to agreed, now that has been confirmed that the action plan was agreed? And can we also specify in what way it was agreed? Was there a vote? Was there a nod of confidence? In what way was it agreed? Thank you.
Yes. And Joe.
Thank you. Just very briefly, I agree with your requests there. The one thing I would say is that, and it's not easy to do this for us as a committee always, but we need to be looking at the arrangements for risk management and be satisfied about those. So I'm not entirely sure, I don't want to pick a bone, but not too sure about it's our responsibility to evaluate risk. I think we have to evaluate the arrangements there are for risk management in the authority. One quick question I do have though, and perhaps you can answer this one easily. Why are you're particularly persuaded about the, what's it called again, the risk enterprise management? Why is that? Could you explain that?
So yeah, I mean, essentially, an organisation the size of Bristol, in terms of understanding its risks from corporate, directorate, service and operational level. And if you look at the current processes that we run, we don't categorise risks as such. So if you were to ask me the question now in terms of what are all our people-related risks, that would be quite an onerous task to go through a whole host of risk registers, rather than actually risks being tagged with people, finance, etc. So an enterprise form of risk management, I think, aids reporting, transparency, and not plays into that decision making as well. So again, that dynamism of operational risks being elevated to corporate risks and vice versa.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. A meeting management question to my colleagues. I had envisaged that we would get to the end of this item before having a break, but I am aware that we've been going for an hour. So are you happy? Shall we try to get to the end of item 9 before we have a break? Is that our aim? Thank you. I'll ask you again after Appendix 3, and we'll see how far we've got. Right. So we are now moving to Appendix 2, which is on records management, and I think this is being introduced by Alison.
Yes. Hi, Alison Mullis. I'm Deputy Chief Internal Auditor. So this audit was relating to the storage of physical records which need to be retained but are not often used. We'd previously audited in this area in April 24 and given a limited assurance opinion. And the aim of this audit was to revisit that area to confirm the arrangements were now in place for safe and secure storage of physical records. The audit did not include digital records. So you will see from the summary that we concluded limited assurance, and the key reasons for that was that the issues previously identified hadn't been addressed well enough. Services were still not engaging with the records management service, and there were issues around the condition in which some of the records were being stored at one of the buildings, which was not conducive to the safe storage of records, and indeed some health and safety issues for the staff working there as well. There were some access issues to the records, and also at the previous audit they were going to procure a new system and implement it, which was going to address many of the issues, and that had been delayed, but I do understand that that is now being implemented. So we have Ben Hookin here, who manages the records management unit, and also Tom Hedges, who was dealing with the property side of that, to update you.
I ask you to identify yourself when you speak.
So Ben Hookin, Head of Information Assurance. So I'm here for the Modern Records unit part of this. So just to follow on from Alison's point around the engagement with the service areas. So my team store or are responsible for storing and storing the files. The services deposit them with us. So one of the challenges we faced is around getting the correct information from the service areas when they deposit those records with us. The new software that Alison's alluded to has now been implemented. So that went live a week before last. So that's now in use with my service area. We're slowly rolling that out to kind of key customers, I suppose that would be, such as legal and business support services. And that will enable us to ensure we capture the correct information, such as review dates. So when a file is stored with us, at what point is it looked at to see whether it still needs to be stored for the amount of time it was deposited for. That was a key issue that we had. So that's gone live, and we're slowly working through with the teams to upskill them and ensure that we capture the correct information there. A few issues around the building access have been addressed already, around access to certain floors. That's been covered off with our our WPS colleagues, and recognise Joe's comment around the list of actions, but you will see in there a lot of the physical building related actions have been at least started, and obviously Tom's here to answer any questions on those. So I'll hand over to any questions.
So did you want to comment on the building issues before we move to questions?
I think we're happy to take questions.
Okay.
So there's quite a lot of listed there, so rather than go through all of them.
Yeah. Could I ask one question on when Richard started to respond to his audit judgment in relation to risk management, he started by saying that he accepted the judgment. Could I ask you the same question?
Yeah, accept the view from audit on this. We'll recognise the issues that they've raised and yeah, working to address them.
Okay, thank you. I just say that because I'm sure that there will be a lot of comments from my colleagues about some of the findings here. Who would like to comment first? Tom.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. There are some concerning parts in this, and again, this kind of taking a couple, I'm sure there'll be other comments. But again, 4.2, all the main management actions in respect of the 6 findings remain outstanding in full or in part. Now, if they were all outstanding in part, at least, you know, we could say, well, some progress has been started. Which of the previous findings remained outstanding in full, and why had they not been started?
Are you were able to comment on that, Ben, or should that come from Alison?
I haven't got the list of actions to hand. I can come back to you on that one, but so right now I haven't got that.
Appreciate that.
I wonder that Alison might be able to comment if you identified things that were outstanding from a previous audit.
Yeah, I don't have the list in front of me, sorry.
Okay, I hope it is a cause for concern that matters that are that they weren't even started is troubling. On another note, we've got a couple of management response actions that note escalation to the IGB if appropriate. Who's deciding whether or not that's appropriate?
So that will be discussed with myself and Tim as chair of the Information Governance Board.
Okay, thank you. Just always the worries about marking your own homework in that regard. Thank you.
So Ed?
Thanks very much. I'd echo your point there, Tom, that it's very difficult to really report like this if we can't see which action, if we can see which actions have been done and any progress from them with another list of the actions to work out which ones have not been done. That's a significant presentation issue. On one of the detailed bullet points under 5.2 in terms of progress that has been made since the audit, and I'm glad to see that there are so many things considering the very concerning nature of some of the issues that were uncovered. The use of the basement for filming purposes. So the Film Office were informed on the 2nd of May that the building could not be used for filming purposes until the building is more compliant. Can I just check if that has resulted in the loss of any film contracts or payments? So I used to be a production manager myself, so I'm aware of the specificity there often is when it comes to location management and how it can really affect a significant production.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Fraser. I'm Tom Hedges, I'm the head of Corporate Landlord. That particular point came up around fire risk. So we had a fire risk assessment undertaken, which created 55 specific actions we needed to undertake. One of those key actions was about mitigating the actual time people spent in the building. So what we've then done is we've effectively limited the time in the building because of the concern of a potential fire risk. And we've managed this throughout. Maximum 10 people at any one time and up to 2 hours at any one time as well. So that ultimately, it does impact the filming opportunity. And the challenge for me, of course, is I would like to see that building generate revenue that we can pump back into improving it. So there's a whole circle there that we want to see if we can close off. We are obviously working with Zurich on this as well, so working very closely with our insurers on the things we need to do to bring the building into the best position we can. And one of the things we're looking at doing there is actually seeing if we can do a number of things that can then allow the filming opportunity to come back in at a later stage. So there's a whole host of actions we're undertaking. We're working through those quite rigorously at the moment. And the plan is that soon we're hoping that we'll be able to sort of unlock that issue and bring filming back on board. So that generates 50% revenue to the building and 50% to the Film Office.
Thanks very much, and we know about the significant impact that the film office can have. We recently had a briefing with them on the improvements of making a filming in parks, for example. There was something you said in there about the total time that can be spent in that space is now 2 hours or less. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, so again, that was an instruction from the fire risk assessment that we undertook in-house from our corporate fire risk team.
Okay, perhaps you can delve in the details of it. I certainly have not seen the space myself, but 2 hours sounds incredibly risk averse. Are you able to share the reasoning behind such a stringent limit?
It's really based on access and egress to the building. Due to the challenges in the wider building, there's only a certain amount of space to get in and out of the asset. So it's really just about managing really the risk in the round.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow Ed's point on that, it is astonishing actually that it would take an internal audit of the record service to identify that there was no fire risk assessment of this building. Are there other buildings that would apply to?
So just to pick up on that point, there was a fire risk assessment, but it is what we would consider out of date. So there was a fire risk assessment previously, but it was time for a new one to be undertaken. So it was a fire risk assessment had expired effectively.
Because the report says that there was no fire assessment for A bond and an out-of-date one for B bond. So your view is there was one once upon a time, but it was too old.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, thank you. To Nick and then to Joe.
Thanks. So currently, is it your view that A bond and B bond are safe for people and suitable for storage of records?
So I think we need to differentiate the two. So A bond is where the majority of these issues are arisen from a physical storage perspective, and there's very limited staff that work in that building. It's very transient, and that's where the time limit piece has been implemented. B bond has also got, B bond is a completely different situation. We've got staff based there, and actually the building is in a lot better condition at B bond. So I think that it's the two are very different. But yes, B bond is, A bond is used for storage of records, museums, things like that. So it is very much an asset that we need. So obviously, as Tom alluded to, we're doing things to try and kind of work to fix it.
So I'll just follow up on that. So for me, this is about risk assessment, ultimately. So the building, is it safe, yes or no? The answer is, if we assess the risk and we manage that risk accordingly, then we consider it to be reasonably safe. So that's sort of the position we're taking at the moment. We're managing that risk and putting a number of actions in place to reduce and mitigate the risk.
So there are a number of actions around asbestos, gas heaters, lifts and the likes that presumably will make it more safe, but the fact that we can't let more than 10 people in there for more than 2 hours at a time suggests that currently it is not very safe. So I appreciate that this is a scale, but this is a building where we're not willing to let our staff work for more than 2 hours at a time because of the risk to their safety. And the second part of my question was, is it a suitable facility for the storage of paper documents?
Yeah, so I agree with your points. An example is when you talk about things like asbestos, so we've got there's 2 lifts in there, one lift's out of order at the moment and another lift's being repaired as well because there's a risk of asbestos in the lift, so there's these sort of like a sort of a scale of activity that we need to undertake, because obviously the lift is a means of escape as well, obviously maybe not used in a fire scenario, but it could be used in other scenarios. So that's what we've done as we've stepped in, particularly as corporate landlord, we've stepped into the place and the asset and we've started to unearth issues, and the more you lift up one problem, like a fire risk assessment to undertake, you do that creates 55 actions. One of those is a fixed wire test. You do the fixed wire test, that creates another 30 things you need to do. So there's a whole sort of ever decreasing amount of activity we need to undertake, and we're working our way through that. We've allocated £100,000 to kick that work off. We need to allocate a bit more to that site, personally, because there will be more things we need to do. Is it safe, or is it appropriate for documents? It's actually built as a warehouse. It was built for storage, so actually the environment is actually typically is very good in that respect. But I mean, ultimately, the first thing is it's people safety, isn't it? That's number one, and that's our starting point. And we do have some other activity we need to do to ensure that the building, the asset, is appropriate for the users as well, and we're working through that. One of our challenges is the complexity of the users, and if we were to do something different with that building down in the near, medium, long term, what would that mean for these users at the moment? Where would they go? How would we sort of decant them to other facilities?
Okay, thank you. Before I go to Joe, can I just, on a meeting management point, that we are on Appendix 2 of item 9, so if anyone is in the room expecting item 14, they may have some time to wait if there's anything else that they'd rather do. Sorry, to Joe and then to...
Thank you, Chair. I was grateful to hear you mention 100,000 because I wanted to know what your thoughts are about the overall financial resources that are needed here, because there's a very long list of actions. Good to see the dates in there. You know, that's obviously helpful to appraise this information, but what about the financial impact? You mentioned a new manager, so obviously there are new people resources going into this. There has to be. There's a lot of work here, isn't there? Can you comment on that, please, on the financial aspect?
Well, I am putting together a full comprehensive list of activity we need to undertake to get back to what I consider to be the base level. So that's really important, and I think it's also important to understand that we are starting a little bit way behind here. So we're hands up to a position where we need to step into this space. The £100,000 for me was just to get us off the ground and to allow me to actually start implementing actions, which I've done. I am producing a clear costed timeline and plan of actions to agree, which I'm presenting up to my senior colleagues and directors, because I think actually I've been trying to add a bit more focus on this particular property, which is obviously, as you can see, is rightly so. And the findings from the audit don't really come as any surprise, to be really honest. So I think this is just a timely reminder of the importance of making sure we maintain our assets appropriately, which is what part of the corporate landlord transformation process is doing across the council.
So are you talking, without going into a specific figure, but are you talking about, considerable amount of financial cost here? And is it, and how is that going to be managed? And is it going to have to be treated as a special case, perhaps?
Potentially. For me, depends how you define considerable, but I think £100,000 is a good considerable amount already. But I think the challenge ultimately is what is this building going to be for the council and for the citizens of Bristol long term, because it's obviously on the Gorham Homes pipeline. So it's in the Western Harbour, so there's an opportunity here that this building could become something different. And it's about managing our contribution financially to this building to keep it in the right place in the interim before we then maybe repurpose the asset longer term. What I don't want to do is go and spend a lot of money and then find we then go and dispose of the building, or we go and do something differently with it, and we find that good investment is quite limited in its sort of lifetime.
Thank you. Okay. David?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask some questions about the access lists for this process. So you have an access list of who can actually access parts of the building. Who decides should be on that list, and is it under change control? Please.
Are you referencing the comment around the B-bond list specifically in there?
You purchased a piece of software called File Track. Does that have access control lists?
So File Track is the records management software. It's not the access management bit. So our File Track records management system is linked to our Active Directory. So that will allow users to request files that they are appropriately allowed to request, if that makes sense. So it was based on that role. So you wouldn't be able to have somebody in let's say, housing request a social care file. It will be done on the correct permissions based on their kind of role within the council.
Okay, that's useful to know. And what granularity does the access lists give people? So you already just gave an example there of housing records being stored. Do people who have access to the housing records also have access to the child protection registers areas, for instance?
So, sorry, just to clarify, nobody has physical access apart from my team. So they request the file via the software. my team will then go and collect it from the required place in the building and then deposit it to them. So the only people that have physical access to the actual physical files are my team and those other staff members such as archives, museums that work in those buildings.
So only your team have actually access to the physical records in the building?
On the floors in B bond, yes, and then A bond, yes, because that's managed by, there's reference in there to the security within A bond.
And do you have access control on the lifts, allowing people access to all the floors, or do they have some prohibition to stop them stopping on a floor they shouldn't do?
So that was one of the things that was raised in B bond, was around the access lifts. That has now been rectified by working with colleagues with Bristol Waste. So that list is only, it has been updated to only those staff who should have access, and there's a new process in place to stop it happening again, where staff members who require access have to be approved by my team or somebody else within archives or something along those lines.
Okay, and going back to my original question, how often is that list reviewed?
I don't know what off the top of my head, but I'll get that. That's part of the
That'd be really useful to know, because that's a really important part of securing documents. Thank you.
Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was going to sit this one out, but I think this is a really concerning report. And on a couple of things that I think we could really do with knowing, coming back to Tom's original point, the fire risks that are raised here, whether these were raised in the previous internal audit, because, you know, fire is a huge risk in a building like this, and if we had raised this in a previous internal audit and nothing had been done about it, that would be extremely concerning from my point of view. And I think we'd also need to know whether there are any other audits which have raised fire risks which have not been appropriately addressed since then. And the other thing, sort of coming back to the way these reports are set out, I think it would be really useful if we could come back in 3 months' time on this particular report and see which of these main issues that were found during this audit have actually been addressed, to give us the confidence that this is really seriously getting better, because it's very concerning. And you can't tell from the management response exactly, you can't tie them up exactly with the issues that are listed. So it'd be really useful if we could see which of these issues have gone away and been dealt with, which ones are still outstanding. And maybe I could ask if that comes back to the next meeting.
Simba, Alison, I think that's a good idea. It is, I think we all have the same response, is if you've had significant issues with safety, effectively, some years ago, and those haven't been addressed, that's very concerning. So lots of the points that made here seem to indicate that the risk level is reduced since the point of audit, but I don't think that the report by itself doesn't demonstrate that. So I think it would be good if we could have a progress update, maybe at not the next meeting, but the following one, maybe, that gave assurance that these steps have been in place. I wonder if you'd be happy to agree that, if we can put that as a kind of action note to seek assurance that the level of risk has reduced. Okay. Any other? Joe.
Just very briefly, Chair, just another suggestion from me. I mean, the percentage of something completed is very useful, and we have this in other reports here. And I think just simple things like that can give us a lot of information very quickly that, all of this information doesn't, and answer some of those basic questions that we have in terms of level of progress and reduction of risks. Okay, so I think that's a simple approach. Percentage completed. Thank you.
That's really helpful, thank you. Okay, if I'm not seeing other comments, I think we move to our report on the disclosures, which I think is being presented by Phil.
Thank you, Chair. This review arose from the Council being issued with a practice recommendation by the ICO in August 2023 due to FOI requests being undertaken within the timescales. A subsequent enforcement notice was issued in March 2024, as there was also a backlog at that time. The council did actually appeal the second enforcement notice, and at the time of the audit, the appeal had not been resolved. In terms of what we looked at, then we looked at the progress that we've made in achieving the improvements required to address the weaknesses identified by the ICO, and also looking at progress in terms of minimising data breaches. We provided limited assurance. The main reasons for that reflected insufficient improvement in timeliness, but also we identified some systemic errors in data recording as well, which reduced reliance that could be placed on the data that was being used and reported internally and externally. So we produced our report, we obtained the management responses in terms of that, and we have also an update against those management responses, and Ben, I think, is going to respond again on this report.
Okay, so we're going to Ben.
Thanks, Phil. So first of all, just to say that a number of the findings have already been addressed in follow-up to this one. So Phil mentioned the issues around the reporting and the accuracy of the reporting. That's already been remedied. So that was just the way our casework system was creating the reports. It was done on date received rather than due date, so we've managed to remedy that now. So those two findings in relation to that, one around FOI and one around subject access requests. So that has now been remedied. There was another finding around kind of the policy around FOI. So again, that one we do have a policy. It has not been documented around its formal sign-off. So that will be on the next IGB agenda, which is September, and it will be formally approved there. So just to say, we do have one. It is published and in use. It's just never been noted that it's been improved. There was an issue around kind of resourcing within the central disclosures team. So we've looked specifically focused on the subject access requests and the support we were providing to reduce the backlog that we were carrying there. So we've currently recruited 2 new members of staff that are due to start later on in August, that will then directly work on clearing the backlog of subject access requests that we hold within the council. In terms of FOIs, obviously that's dealt with by each individual service area, provided support by my central team. So there's a number of actions we're taking around supporting those, such as continued reporting to the Business Considerations Board, which has got representation from each division in the council, and we're raising issues with particular service areas, and we're going to start asking those service areas to provide an action plan that can go alongside the corporate action plan that my central team are pulling together, that my central team are updating to go alongside the current one we have, to hopefully drive improvements on this.
Okay, so thank you, Ben. The colleagues have comments. Going to Tom.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Obviously, there's a few, again, concerning things in here. I'll just focus on a couple of points. So, first off, we've got the point that the number of data breaches is increasing, and there is no escalation policy to deal with repeat offenders. That's partially kind of answered then below with data breach reporting is being brought up to the ICO standards. Individuals who cause a data breach are not reprimanded. Fair enough, I understand the logic behind it, that we do want people to come forward when it happens and these are accidents. But I note there's not really an answer around the escalation policy or how we're handling repeat offenders. So question 1 on that is, do we have many repeat offenders and how are we handling them?
So I think that the way we look at it is slightly different. Rather than repeat offenders, is look at the intent. So if it was an accident, then obviously training and guidance is provided to that individual. If it was a malicious action, then that's a completely different conversation, and we have actually spoken with HR colleagues around how we would escalate that. So if a staff member deliberately or maliciously causes a data breach, and that is dealt with differently, and that is very much then escalated. So we have separated the two out in that way. And in terms of them increasing, so the number of data breaches that we are recording ourselves in the council is increasing. The numbers that we're reporting to the ICO is different. There's a threshold. That one is increasing, but not in the same proportion.
Okay, so do we have people who, and I appreciate that point between people who've done it out of malice and people who've just made an honest mistake. Do we have any individuals who have made that honest mistake 2 or 3 times despite that additional training, or has that additional training generally been enough to resolve it?
So I've not been made aware of any. So that's not to say it hasn't happened, but it's not happened enough for it to be escalated to me.
Okay, thank you for clarifying on that one, because obviously there is some concern if we've got some data literacy issues, but it sounds like the training is having, when that's necessary. Second point is obviously there's a few things on the FOI requests here, significant backlog, the action response to FI reporting is a directorate responsibility, the level of response is inconsistent. Can I ask where that backlog primarily sits on a directorate level?
So I don't have the figures to hand, but I'm happy to share accurate figures afterwards. I'd rather share accurate ones than kind of mislead.
I would appreciate if we could get that information.
Yes, I think that would be. I think we have a question from Nick.
Thank you. 2 things from me. The first one is, could you talk me through the enforcement notice from the Information Commissioner's Office and why, and I guess how the decision was made, that we chose to appeal it rather than action it, and then as we have a list of actions ready to go, why we wouldn't simply make our service better rather than fight the regulator.
So I'll just say I'm not sure it's appropriate to comment on the enforcement notice at this point, so I'll let Tim answer that one. But in answer to your second point around the improvements, we are working on those. I think the internal audit has highlighted that we haven't made as much progress as we would like, but we are making progress on the 6 points that were raised in that notice.
I think Tim would like to comment.
Chair, if I may very briefly, just to echo what Ben has said there, it wouldn't be appropriate to comment on live legal proceedings. However, I can assure the committee that the decision made to appeal the enforcement notice was a decision made by me under the Council's constitution. I'm responsible for instituting and defending legal proceedings. I did that based on legal advice at the time, and as the report says, we are waiting probably longer than we thought we would be waiting. It's something like 18 months now we've been waiting for a decision from the tribunal. We will report that in due course as and when we receive the judgment.
Okay, thank you.
So, in deciding to appeal the Information Commissioner's notice, did you get a political steer or report politically after the decision was made? It seems strange that something that seems fairly momentous is decided in that narrow way.
So, defending and instituting legal proceedings is a matter delegated to myself as a Director of Legal and Democratic Services. I have a duty to the courts, and it is not a political consideration whether or not I institute or defend legal proceedings. We do that day in, day out. That responsibility sits with myself for a whole range of legal activity that we conduct. There are delegations to the solicitors in the legal team to undertake the vast majority of that work on my behalf and in my name.
Okay, thank you. The second area I wanted to pick up on the policy around FOIs. You mentioned it's in process of being signed off by the governance group. Once approved, would that be published in a public forum so as people who wish to make an FOI were aware of our policy before they put that in?
Yeah, so we already have the guidance on how to make an FOI on our website. The internal policy, yes, we will. We can publish that alongside the guidance that's on our external website as well.
David.
Thank you, Chair. I might have mentioned this before, but I've been on audit for 4 years now, and I just conferred with I just conferred with Jonathan Hucker, who's also been on audit for a similar time here. Why is it this is the first time we've heard that the ICO is contesting our work as a council? I would have thought that would have been coming to audit in some way, because it's a reputational risk for the council.
If you like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you can say.
I can't respond, Chair, because I bring to the audit committee things that I can link with, but however, within the annual governance statement, there is that reference to that issue. But I don't think it's a matter that I can. I mean, there are many things that happen within the council, so it's very, very difficult for me to say why it didn't come here. But yeah, but there's a link to it within the AGS.
Okay. I also have some questions about the actual appendix. There's a talk of an updated request handling policy. Can that be shared with members, please?
I'm happy to do so once it's updated and signed off. Yeah, happy to do so.
That's good to hear, thank you. And there's also talk of an FOI policy. Will that actually be coming to audit at some point so that we can quantify it?
Well, it's not in the current work plan. Do you want to comment, Joe?
It's not the role of the audit committee to review policies in that sense. This is just a routine operational policy. The committee should be assured that we are taking steps to ensure that we have such a policy in place, and I think Ben has given that assurance this afternoon.
If not audit, which of the policy does it fall under?
So it would fall under S&R. But again, it wouldn't be a policy that we would take to the S&R committee. We would, policy committees deal with strategic policy level matters, and this is a routine operational policy. You have to remember that the policy around FOI ostensibly stems from the Freedom of Information Act and the Environmental Information Regulations, which sets out a clear statutory framework, and our policy will in effect reflect that. That's our statutory regime.
Out of interest, I think once the FOI and EIR request handling policy has been updated and approved by ITB, it would be good to share it with all the members, because I think we'd be interested.
I think possibly the longer answer is it depends how relevant it is to our assurance of the internal control. So probably, I don't think it would come by itself, but it might come as part of a review of the AGS or an audit or potentially an audit into that area if that were being investigated in the future. So I don't think we should expect to see it in the next meeting or the meeting after. But if it were relevant to our assurance of the controlled environment, then it might be. I think I had Ed first and then Ed.
Thank you, Chair. Just to ask regarding one of the bullet points under 4.2 in Appendix 3. It says that the Freedom of Information and the EIR request handling policy was last updated in February 2021, which does feel like quite a long time ago, but it's still in draft, which is quite concerning. And who needs to approve it is unclear. Can I verify now if there is someone who is going to take responsibility for the approval of this? Is this something that will be happening at director level? Is it something that Director of Legal Services might look after? Is it something that needs to go to the chief executive to be delegated down to someone? Who's going to take responsibility for this?
So that will be approved in September, the Information Governance Board, which is chaired by Tim.
Thank you.
So we go to Ellie.
Yeah, I think we're struggling with this format to match things up. Sorry, stop banging on about it. Yeah, I suppose it's kind of a comment really that FOI and requests are a really big part of how the public interact with us. And I'm obviously new to audit, but I've got some kind of experience of FOI previously, and this is all, as with the previous one, slightly concerning. And the fact that our policy isn't online and all that kind of stuff is quite worrying. Again, can we get an update on this in, say, 6 months' time to this committee? Just, you know, it doesn't need to be a full document, but just having a summary of what progress is being made, because I just think this is such a key part of how we operate as a council.
I assume Ben will be happy with...
Happy to bring a summary update back in 6 months.
Okay, thank you. Two more to go. So we now move to the corporate property appendix, which I think is also being introduced by Phil.
Thank you. The Council is developing the corporate landlord model, which is a centralised approach towards provision management and maintenance property. We looked at how the planned maintenance of the corporate estate was being managed, and as with other reports in this section, we provided a limited assurance opinion. The main reason for the opinion was that the audit was unable to provide assurance as to whether the current year of the planned maintenance programme was actually being delivered as agreed. This was due to a couple of things. Mainly there was quite a lot of works outstanding and also without clear dates of when they were going to be actually undertaken. So there was a lack of monitoring at the time of that planned maintenance programme, and we identified there was too much of a heavy reliance on the contractor who was undertaking the works to identify the gaps in their testing and also to identify penalties due to them not completing their own work. We produced our report. We reported through. This is one that sits within the G&R Directorate. Tom is here to respond in terms of the findings, provided a management update against the original management actions. So I'll hand over to Tom.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Planned maintenance. So this is effectively about maintaining our assets right up from the building level right down to specific items such as mechanical and electrical equipment, so say a lift or a boiler. The audit highlighted, as we know, limited assurance with 5 key areas, which was not unexpected. As we know, I mentioned earlier on about the corporate landlord transformation programme we're undertaking, and this piece we're talking about now is a big part of that transformation. So for me, there's the retendering of the hard FM contract, which is a really important piece because it has a number of elements within it, a number of work streams, which will provide robust information that we can go forward and work with. That's at the heart of the topic. We're also undertaking a full asset verification process, so this will include all assets within the new scope of corporate landlord, and that's currently underway and will take up to 12 months to complete that full encompassing piece of work. We're also working with the SFG20 approach, which is a Services and Facilities Group industry standard for building maintenance, specifically for planned maintenance schedules. That will provide a live, up-to-date compliance library that will allow us to track, monitor and step in to mitigate compliance issues as well. And that will automatically be updated as compliance requirements change sort of throughout the year. The property asset management system is another key area I want to just touch on as well, because we've recently awarded that to Cllr, so that's another big piece of work in the corporate landlord transformation. And again, this will take us through till May 2026 to embed this new software, which will allow us again to manage and monitor and then also react, but also importantly report as well. So it will give us the building blocks to allow us to go forward and maintain our vast estate, because as we know, we own 40% of the city. And there's a huge amount of assets and estate to sort of maintain. You've seen the key findings. The timeframes are noted from the corporate landlord team, and all actions fall in line appropriately within the implementation of the hard FM contract and the PAM system. We should start to see some improved outcomes as of September this year, which is once we get the new hard FM contract stood up. The first monthly report will come through at the end of September, on the 30th of September. And all management actions are progressing.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to comment? We'll start with Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to say, one of the main issues identified was that the asset register was incomplete. And the answer to that is that internal audit have been advised the council is introducing a new property asset management system, which is great. But obviously, having a new system doesn't automatically improve your data. So are we completing that register now so that when the new system comes online, all the data that goes onto it is actually complete and up to date?
Yeah, well, that's a really important piece of work, and it is a high-risk area, to be honest with you, but as I said, we've got a 12-month programme ahead of us doing asset verification, so that's effectively what that is, working with Law and Stewart, a hard FM contractor, and going around every single site and working out exactly what we've got. You know, they say you can't manage what you can't measure. You can't manage what you don't know exists. So, you know, so we really need to get the full, complete visibility and transparency of every single asset in the organisation.
Yeah, thanks. So, I think it's just sort of important to note that the answer isn't that we're getting a new system. The answer is that we're doing the work to find out what data's missing. Yeah.
So, Tom and then Dave.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this one. We've got some interesting stuff here as well. Part of my worry goes, because I know from my work on Strategy and Resources Committee, and I will try not to touch on individual items, but I know one of the reasons they're given for a property to be disposed of tends to be that it has deteriorated to a point where it would cost us far more to resolve than it would to sell it on. And of course, I'm quite keen for us to maintain a robust portfolio. I mean, I know there's elements of disagreement there within the council, but I personally am in favour of a very robust programme. So my worry with this is that we may, as a result of this, miss vital maintenance that will cause more properties to be in that position as our role as a corporate landlord. So can you give me some reassurance that as part of the checks we're doing with this, we are prioritising looking for signs of that deterioration where we can to arrest that early, rather than risk, again, being in that invidious position where we're selling things off because we simply can't afford to repair them?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So for me, this will come under the Strategic Asset Management Plan. So all areas of the organisation will have an asset management plan. And from that plan, we obviously need to work out what we want to do with all our assets. So whether it's, for me, it's effectively retain, repurpose or release. That's a very simplistic way of approaching any asset in the organisation. We either retain it as it is, we repurpose it for something different, or we look to release it. That plan will help enable and inform that. What we're doing here is we're providing building blocks that will give us data and information to allow us to make more informed decisions. So I'm assuming that's what you're alluding to.
It is to an extent. I suppose my point is the way in which we go about getting that data. I want to be reassured that when we are seeking that data and the way in which we're going and gathering it, we're looking at it with a priority of identifying areas that might be in danger of release first. So what mitigation are we putting in place to ensure that we are identifying areas that or properties that might need maintenance early? That's my concern on that.
Yeah, okay. So I guess obviously we're talking about the sort of governance route. So for example, the estate strategy board, so any property which would want to do something different with would go into that process and that governance route. But these building blocks are effectively giving us the ability to make decisions, and the premise of the corporate landlord approach allows you to take the wide view of the whole of the organisation, so we know where best to put our resources, whether that be financial or officers' time.
I feel perhaps this may just be that I'm not expressing myself very well, in which case I apologise. But what I'm trying to determine is when we're creating these building blocks and we're working out the data, what we know and what we don't know, how are we going about that in such a way as to get a better picture earlier of where the problem areas are? Are we just sort of doing a review point by point, or have we are we taking a point of, for example, looking at when maintenance was last carried out and looking at the properties which have had the least amount earlier? Does that make some degree of sense? I'm sure there would be better ways of doing it, but something along those lines.
Yeah, I think I understand the question.
That was answered very diplomatically, Tom.
I think I guess we're straying more into property strategy than planned maintenance, where this obviously audit is focusing on the maintenance of the building. So I think there's maintaining a building, and how do you make sure we're maintaining it from a compliant view, and then obviously from compliance you work on to added value, and obviously making sure buildings are fit for purpose. And then there's obviously wider strategy in property. So how do we use a building differently, and that sort of maybe moving into a different conversation.
Are we going further into the epistemology of...
I think the point in which I'm trying to convey, and apparently doing so extremely badly, is that we have a number of properties across the city. Some of them will be in poor condition, some of them will be in good condition. We don't know the exact condition of all of our properties. What steps are we taking to try and identify those that are in unknown but maybe in poor condition, so that we seize any problems earlier? Are we taking those on initially as part of the process? What is the schedule for us carrying out this data gathering so that we can be a better assurance or more assurance that we're catching ones that may otherwise go to release for a lack of maintenance over the course of a year? Hopefully that made some degree of sense.
Right, yeah, that's a bit more, that's nice and clear, thank you very much. I think I'll take that one away and I can happily come back to you with a sort of a form of a programme and an approach to how we tackle that. But at the moment, the 12-month asset verification piece of work, that is just going across our entire portfolio, working top down, working through the detail, because there's different granular layers of detail within any asset. So that will be done across the piece. So if you're considering, if we've got one decrepit building in the corner there, how do we make sure we capture that before we start to do work on a nice shiny building that's in good condition? Then, yeah, I understand your approach. So maybe I could come back to you on that later on.
Thank you, and thank you for bearing with me on that line of questioning. Appreciate it.
I think David had a question, and Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to delve into Tim's point about the asset register being incomplete. So the assets of Bristol City Council and their value form a core part of our annual accounts. Will we have to restate our annual accounts now we've found all these new assets?
I feel that's a question for Andy rather than for Tom. So it's about the impact of the change in asset stock condition on our reported value.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect a restatement of our 24-25 accounts unless significantly material in terms of the asset value, but if they're relatively small assets, no.
That's good to hear. Can we have a list of the assets that the new assets have been found or realised that we don't actually own? Please.
Hoping that's quite a short list.
We can provide that, yeah.
Okay. I think we had a question from Jonathan and then from Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question is similar in a sense to David's question, picking up on the fact that the asset register is incomplete. I wondered if the physical asset register is integrated with the financial fixed asset register, which of course would be used to value the fixed assets in the accounts and to calculate depreciation. So my question is there any integration between those two systems, or are they completely standalone systems which don't talk to each other?
Just to be clear, you're talking about the property asset management system. Which systems are you referring to, please?
I'm referring to the asset register, which is incomplete, being a physical fixed asset register. And of course, the valuation in the council's accounts would be driven off of a financial fixed asset register. And that fixed asset register would also be used to calculate depreciation. So my question is whether those two registers are actually integrated or if they're completely separate.
So I think this is probably a question for Richard.
So I'd have to come back to you, Councillor, just about the specifics of the integration. I understand that they're currently separate.
Okay, if that's not a simple answer, then yes. Thank you. I think we have a question from Joe.
Thank you. I would be a bit concerned here about the timeliness of the responses to the issues and the resolution of them. I mean, there are dates here, you know, don't get me wrong, I can see there, but we seem to be going way ahead into the future before, you know, we're building, and you've referred a couple of times to building blocks, you know, to improvement. But you just get the feeling that this is going to take a long time, and there are, you know, there's new systems, there's a contractor involved, there's KPIs to be hammered out. This is a long term. You get a feel of long term from this almost, and I'm just wondering about that, and I wonder as well about, you know, internal audit doing you know, a review of progress here, and how will that work? Can you give us some assurance about that? Because this is a limited assurance report that we've had, and yet we feel that, you know, it's going to take a long time before that limited assurance opinion can be challenged.
Yeah, thank you very much. Corporate landlord was first raised, I think, here back in 2003. I started here last year, so taking a long time is something we can't afford for it to do anymore. And there is a large asset base we need to work through, and we've got obviously the new NEC4 contract, but with the new hard FM contract is a different structure of contract, so that will allow us to work in different ways. So I have faith in that approach, which is positive, and as I said, that starts 1st of September, which is very, very, very good news. We just need to keep working through the challenges. We are putting some more management-based actions in place, which do feature in the report, more basic communication methods, reporting methods. So there are some things we can do a bit more from a basic level of managing and oversight, but things like the KPIs and things like that will have to come through. They have to come through with the data and information, which we discussed a minute ago. So there's an element of we have to go through at the pace we've set, or we've been set. I don't think we can go any faster. There's just an awful lot to work through. The main thing is we're on the right path, but I welcome to be challenged and to keep the pace up on this, because now we've started corporate landlord in this evolution, we need to keep it up.
I'd like to ask a question. So there's a reference to hard FM contracts and a new hard FM contract. So do I read that as there was one hard FM supplier rather than several? And my reason for asking that is, in terms of property management or property maintenance contracts, you usually have classically as a distinction between a total property management contract, which maintains assets to a fixed asset standard, which works well for new properties with a known asset standard, but can be really expensive for a range of different buildings of different unknown asset standards. Or you might have a surveyor model with a number of different suppliers doing different types of job, particularly more or less expensive job according to their specialism. So could you briefly describe what the new model is?
Yeah, so the new approach is effectively with Launchchurch, who are actually the incumbent contractor anyhow, so they've been with us for a number of years. So firstly, there's positives there because they know much of the asset base. Obviously, because we've evolved to take on board more assets over this coming 12-month period, there will be new assets coming into that as well. The new contract will effectively allow us to do things in different ways. I don't have all the detail with me now, as you said, just to discuss it briefly. But for me, this is about making sure we can hold them to account, and also to make sure that the work that is done to the standard we require to remain compliant and have make sure we have the checks and balances in place to allow that to sort of like complete the circle, because there were previously some issues around tasks were being completed, but we weren't able to get completeness on that. So we were being told they were done and they were being signed off and approved. However, we need to just make sure that was actually the case. So there's a number of different areas there that this contract will pick up, and it will certainly improve the reporting side of it as well.
I can see how that's better than now. What makes me nervous is being reliant on a supplier's understanding of your assets. So I think it would be good to see progress when that contract's in place. So maybe 6 or 12 months after implementation, it would be good to see an assessment of the impact. Because if we have discovered that we're too reliant on someone else's asset judgment, or if we discovered that we get a good deal for expensive jobs or a bad deal for inexpensive jobs, that's not necessarily in our interest. So it would be good to see how that's working. I don't want to do anything before that contract starts because it's so imminent, but it would be good to see what the impact of that is over a period up to 6 or 12 months.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I would like to finish
item 9, if we can. So we've got the last one, therefore, is the audit of the capital programme, which I think is also being introduced by Phil.
Thank you, Chair. The Council has a very significant expenditure budget, and last year in September the Capital Portfolio Management Office was established to support project management across the whole of that capital portfolio. Its role included both improving management processes but also looking at consistent application as well. In terms of the audit opinion, again, we provided limited assurance on the governance arrangements, and the opinion was largely derived from our review of a sample of capital projects. Most of those we found had gone over budget and had surpassed original timelines. Also, we found there wasn't a consistent approach in terms of using standard documentation and so on. The PMO's plans for embedding roles and responsibilities, given that it was only established last September, were still at the mobilisation stage, although we could see that they were starting to have an effect. And it was intended that those templates, key policies and procedures will be put in place by the end of July, 2 days' time. The report was issued to both GNR and also to PMO. We received, as usual, management responses, acceptance of our findings, and Sean from the PMO is here to give an update on the management actions and to answer any questions the committee may have.
Okay, so over to you, Sean.
Chair, I was going to talk to this.
Want to comment on that first?
Yeah, is that okay, Chair? Because I see governance and oversight of our capital programme a key area for the Corporate Leadership Board, so I'm going to talk to this one on behalf of the Corporate Leadership Board, and then on the questions maybe bring Sean in, so it's great to have Sean here. So thanks, Phil. I'd say my first opening comment on this one is I do accept the limited assurance. I think I see this as an informing audit, because noting that the change in terms of the capital PMO setup started later on last year and is going through a mobilisation phase. So I see this audit as how can we use the limited assurance and some of the findings almost as the evidence base to improve our governance arrangements. So I'm going to talk to that a little bit in terms of, since joining the council, what I've been involved in, and that is working closely with Sean to look at how we can get more consistency in terms of our kind of board setup and oversight of capital, because we have got a large capital programme, but then also we need to have that kind of director review challenge meetings sitting under an overarching capital investment board, which we recently have changed the terms of reference and kind of reconstituted that. Working closely with Sean, we've looked at other core cities in terms of best practice, and also my previous council that did have a fairly, I suppose, advanced capital governance arrangement in place, because also a council with a very large capital programme. So we have drawn on best practice to, and also some of the good practice that's already happening in Bristol to improve our governance arrangements. I think also just recognising that within the audit, experience, capacity and knowledge loss, that is a risk. So it is key for us to have clear guidance around capital decision making, and that's what the team are working on. So in terms of capital monitoring, capital commentary and capital decision making, standardising and creating user-friendly guidance is things that the team are doing to address some of the findings in the audit report. And I think also just to note that in terms of general process, there are areas that actually, if we do a deep dive, where it's working really well in terms of the support that Sian's team's doing in terms of our growth and regeneration area, because that's where a lot of the capital programmes are. There's really good programme management documents. What we need to now focus on is getting the join up between the programme management documentation and the financial monitoring that parts of Richard's team do. So when we think about our kind of public-facing reporting to S&R committee, we're reporting on the budgetary performance of the capital programme, but also the scheme delivery commentary as well. So there's more join up, and that's an improvement area that we will be focusing on. Thank you, Chair.
Can I draw attention to one comment, which is about project boards? So there's one of the comments in 4.2 says, in some cases, project boards didn't exist or met infrequently. From your perspective, in terms of overseeing the capital programme, how can that happen? Or more importantly, how do you stop that happening?
I'd question, in some areas, are the boards necessary, first of all, if we have got, so I think for me, just being a bit of a sort of governance geek, having a single corporate capital oversight board is necessary, and that's the decision-making pathway at an officer level before going on to committee to make sure we've got good governance in place. Then we do need to tailor our governance to the directorate, so almost having a capital steering group for growth and regeneration, absolutely necessary, and that is in place. We may have in the resources directorate where there's maybe 2 capital programme items. I'd say it's not necessary to have a resources capital board or capital steering group in place because there's only a couple of capital items in the programme. But so for me it's about consistency in language, so we have a capital investment board and then we have capital kind of steering groups that sit under that, and they need to be set up and governed and managed appropriately for the size of the programme, and that's what we're doing through the governance.
Apologies for that digression. Can we start? Do you have a comment, Joe? So Joe and then Nick.
Thank you, Andy. I mean that's assuring to hear your approach to this and welcoming it, and trying to use it to, of course, initiate strategic improvement. Really. I'm going to just ask you about the one item at the end of the issues there, that there was no risk recorded on the risk management system relating to the capital portfolio. Or there was one risk, sorry, and it was too broad. So will we be seeing a more complete picture of the risks that are clearly still there in regard to this issue?
I think it's a good point on the corporate risk. I think capital affordability probably is a corporate risk. I'd say capital delivery against kind of approved schemes, it probably sits down at a kind of a direct or divisional risk level, so it wouldn't go right up to being a corporate risk. But I think overall affordability of the capital programme in terms of the underwriting risk the council holds, that is probably one that we need to consider.
Okay, Nick.
Thanks. We've heard from the PMO before at this committee, and they are very reassuring. In some ways, the timing is either fortunate or unfortunate that we've had an audit of the old system. If there's a new system, it'll all be much better. Could you tell us a little bit about where that extends to for the Capital Investment Board, the PMO? Is there a value threshold of projects that are included in this new system? Is it limited to projects that are being promoted solely by the Bristol City Council, or does it include things which are coming through the CRSTS, for example, and other funding streams?
I'll just talk about the decision pathway bit, because under the Capital Investment Board, all capital approvals that need to go through the decision pathway will go through that board and then onwards to committees. But you've raised key points about what's the board doing, where's it spending its time, and it will be on the the larger scale, more material schemes. But Sian's been working closely on this one, so I'll just invite Sian to come in.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing in terms of proportionality. We need to assess that. We don't currently have a specific threshold for if it's under or over a certain value it applies, because otherwise there's a judgment in terms of the impact, the number of wards it affects, the scale of the work. So sometimes simpler projects can be more expensive and vice versa. So there'll be a judgment call there, but we'd work to the £500,000 key decision threshold as the initial sort of assumption where we need to be reviewing those business cases in more detail. The business case templates and approaches are available to all teams and staff as well, so I think there's a general best practice rule if you should still be considering those items and reviewing them for your projects, but we won't be there won't be as much support for those at the lower end of value or complexity.
Thank you. And the Transport Capital Programme, is that included? Because quite often we have reports come to the Transport Committee asking to skip governance stages because there isn't time to go through all of the process, which feels like bad practice to me.
So I was going to say, yeah, transport is part of that, CRSDS is part of that. Obviously there are dependencies on how the MCA works and the decision pathway there, which does create complexity in terms of timelines and pathways, but they are included. There's PMO support now, so also since September there's additional resource in there to try and align practices and processes for transport as well as the wider council.
Did you have a question, Tim?
Yeah, just a quick one. Coming back to the risk, Andy, I appreciate that corporate risk might be that our capital programme is underspent or overspent or whatever. But I do feel we should be able to drill down into those statistics so that we can see how, which programmes might be the ones that are at risk and which ones aren't. Is that something we can do currently in the reporting system? I've got a feeling sometimes you can drill into things and sometimes you can't, and I can't remember.
It's an area I'd like us to improve because we should be able to get into that level of understanding on capital performance with the budget monitoring that goes to SNR. But I think it is almost doing that delivery, RAG assessment and commentary as well, so then we can use that public reporting process as one to escalate key risks if a scheme is slipping, because really that should be the start conversation about a future key decision on how we're going to resolve something, whether it's an affordability issue with the scheme. So that is something we're going to look at.
Yeah, I mean, it's on any good project, any project that's got good project management will have a risk register associated with it anyway. So presumably the information is already there for each project. It's just whether we can sort of, tie it in.
Absolutely, and from the work that Sian's team does, there's a big document report, monitoring all of the schemes that's already there. So it's just how we translate that on the bigger schemes that go into the public reporting.
So, David?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask a question about 5.2. It talks about the majority of actions remain on track to be achieved by the target date. What is the target date? And what will be the first capital programme that will be completed using this new paradigm, please?
Okay, Sian, would you like to answer this one?
Yeah, I was going to say, so most of the actions in this audit were phased over sort of July, August, September. So essentially of the management actions that were committed to, they're all either delivered or on track to be delivered by the date. So this won't necessarily be a full rollout of across the capital portfolio. Every project is suddenly aligned to the new framework and policies, but against the actions we've agreed, such as ensuring that guidance is up to date and communicated, those things will be in place by essentially, I think, end of September was the final actions that we committed to.
Okay. Do we have any other questions, Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, last year, in July, this committee considered a report by Arcadis into the management of the Bristol Beacon project. I'd just like to know if the recommendations from that report have been embedded into the management of capital projects that are taking place now.
So we came back to Audit Committee in November last year, I believe. So I understand you had a report in July on Bristol Beacon. Myself and a colleague came back in November to update on plans and progress there. So there's still work underway, delivering some of those and progressing the actions. But all of that is fed into the conversations today and other content. So yeah, it's all interconnected.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there are no further comments, this concludes item 9. I feel like we're going to have a break now. So about 5 minutes, more or less, so if by 20 past, if we can have everyone in place. Again, meeting management point. I am nervous at the time. We will we will get through the actions we can do. I think we'll need to make a decision around, just before 5, we'll make a decision whether we are able to extend or whether we will come back for other items, because I'm very conscious that people may have to get places and there may be children waiting, etc., or trains that won't wait for you. So I'm hoping the next item is relatively less contentious, but the one after may be more. So, right. Although not if the director doesn't appear for it, which would be genius. So that's a smart move. So agenda item 10 is our report. So this is our opportunity as committee members to comment on what we've been doing over the year. So I'd like to thank Alison first of all for putting the initial draft together. Thank all members for commenting. Most of you have. This is this will be our only fundamental report from the committee to the council in the future. So we will stop having media reports. We have stopped having media reports. So we will have one annual report. We used to have a report every 6 months, so we are doing that now every 12 months. Thank you, Nick. And also, David and I attended a Southwest group for audit chairs that was substantially about annual reports, which made me feel that we were broadly doing the right thing. I feel it summarises what we've been doing, but do we have any comments before we note it? Or approve it for onward progression to a full council? Brilliant, thank you. And that's a model approach. So, agenda item 11 is the committee model review group proposal. So this is the report of the group of councillors who have been reviewing the Constitution with some recommendations for changes. So this is interesting in lots of ways. So this is a substantive recommendation on which we need to formally vote. It's recommendations for the future, not to comment on the past. It's unusual for an audit committee in that sense, but that is the process for amendments to the Constitution. It's part of our role as the audit committee to review changes to the Constitution and to recommend them. There have also been circulated recently some amendments which we will discuss later. I believe there are 3. So just from a process point of view, Tim will introduce the report and then we will comment on the report in general. I believe there are amendments to be proposed. If so, we will vote on them individually. If there are 3, we'll vote 3 times. And then we will vote on the substantive recommendation itself. I feel Ed has a comment.
Yeah, I've got a point of order here. It's not clear from any of the 3 amendments who the mover of the amendments are, and therefore I'm not sure they can actually be taken.
So my understanding is that they are to be moved by...
Yeah, I believe we did, when we submitted them, we did state that I'd be moving them and Councillor Bunkins would be seconding. So if that hasn't been put on the report, that's
unfortunately that wasn't
been missed for some reason.
So, I think we're asking Tim to introduce the report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is quite a technical report, but as you said in your introduction, it summarises the recommendations from the Committee Model Review Group, which has been meeting since last October, reviewing various aspects of the new governance arrangements that came into effect in May last year. The work of the review group has covered all the areas that were envisaged by full council when it established the review group, and has looked at areas including the leadership role and functions of committees, councillors, and the approach to policy development, and various briefings and report writing. It's also looked at specific things around local decision making and our budget process in particular. There are a number of changes proposed in the report. I'm not going to go through every single one of them in detail. I'm happy to take questions on the specifics. I've supported the working group and been on that journey with them, so I'm familiar with the technical detail. I'm happy to answer any technical questions about them. You do have the appendix, which includes the specific wording that would be incorporated into the Council's constitution to reflect the changes that have been proposed, and the supplementary paper that was published yesterday also includes track changes in respect of the 3 proposed amendments as well. In terms of your role here this afternoon, just to be clear, we agreed some time ago as a council that the audit committee would discharge an assurance role when it came to reviewing the council's constitution before things were formally approved by full council. So your role here this afternoon is to be satisfied that from a governance perspective that these are adequate and effective amendments to the council's governance framework, and as I said, they've been the subject of lengthy deliberations by the review group over the last 6 to 9 months. I'm happy to leave it there, Chair, but obviously take any technical questions on any aspect of the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I would have given any member of the Committee Model Review Group the opportunity to comment, but as there isn't anyone here, that won't detain us. So this is comments on the report and the recommendations as they are. So can we take some comments on that at this lead, David?
Thank you, Chair. At the top of page 59, there's a discussion about motions, and I'm grateful that we're removing the concept of the political hat for selecting silver motions, because that's quite random and hasn't helped democracy, I don't think. But has the concept of one party getting both silver and gold motions been allowed for here, and what would happen in that instance?
So as drafted, Councillor Wilcox, the golden and the silver motions are on rotation, so we would look with the whips and the Lord Mayor to ensure that there was, two different political groups, I guess, having different motion at the agenda conference.
The rotation schedule will be offset so that could never happen.
I'm sure there's a way that we could do that to enable that to be the case.
Just as long as it's been considered.
I just want to make a couple of comments on specific sections of the report. So firstly, delighted to see that the Development Control Committee has been recommended for a name change to the Planning Committees. I think that's far more transparent and accessible to the general public. It's a far better understood phrase for the remit that it has. As an area committee chair, I'm also pleased to see that we'll have the ability to set our own work programme if this is passed by full council in the future and by ourselves today, and that we'll have and that the terms of reference will include provision regarding public art, which I know has been a key issue in several of the area committees and has been part of our area committee chair's discussion. So really pleased that's been fed in. And I also wanted just to emphasise the effectiveness of the role of the vice chair as specified in the original motion. So, it says focusing on carrying out the roles and responsibilities when the chair is unable to do so or unable to discharge them, and undertaking them in consideration with the leader and the deputy leader of the council. Ultimately, this is a shared agenda. It's a shared agenda in our committee system, and that is the right and appropriate way for the use, right and appropriate way of use for the vice chair role in that kind of administration, and it creates very clear sense of accountability to the public, and can reduce confusion, which we know is sometimes cited as a limitation. So I just wanted to praise those elements and thank the Committee Model Review Group for their work. They've had 8 months of meetings, so plenty of time to due diligence for feeding in ideas from all parties where they participated. So I just wanted to praise those elements.
Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a quick comment on the role of the Finance Subcommittee. Previously it said that the subcommittee will also have responsibility for cross-cutting financial monitoring, but that's been removed. So that does give me slight cause for concern, because I think that the Finance Subcommittee should have responsibility for monitoring emerging financial results. I have been given an assurance separately that the Finance Subcommittee will continue to be able to do that, but I would have more sort of assurance if I actually saw that in writing. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. There's a well-known saying that a camel is a horse designed by committee, I'm sure. But you've got to wonder what the animal would look like if the committee that designed it was designed by a committee. This report is as uncontroversial as it could be, I think, but we do think it misses out on some fundamental points, so we have tabled an amendment which I hope all members will give consideration to, and we'll come to that at the end of this debate. I do have a few additional comments. I do agree with the change to the wording around the Finance Subcommittee, because this body certainly was not responsible for producing the Council's budget, which is what it says in the current Constitution. In reality, what it does, it takes reports from officers and asks some pertinent questions. So that's definitely right. Changing the name of Development Control Committee to Planning Committees seems to be a decision that could have been taken without the need for a year-long committee, to be honest. I'm not really sure we couldn't have done that without all of that. But there is one wording change in here, which is on page 57, which I do think is unclear, and have had a discussion with relevant people about this. It's taken out, it's added in the, I'll just get it up so that everybody can know what I'm talking about. So it's added in the words within 7 calendar days of any published consultation period, but I don't think that makes it clear when those within 7 days of the beginning of the consultation period, the end of the consultation period. So I've asked development control people and monitoring officer what the intent of this is, and I believe it's just to formalise the existing arrangement, which is 7 days from the end of the consultation period that you have to call in an application. So I just think that wording is slightly unclear and could do with being clarified, and I wonder if that's something that we could recommend without any controversy.
I wonder if Tim is able to.
Yes, on a fresh pair of eyes, it's clear that there's 3 words missing there. It should really say within 7 calendar days of the end of any published consultation period. So we can tidy that wording up without there needing to be any formal vote or anything. We'll ensure that's done for full council.
That can be corrected as a
that's just a clerical error, yes.
Okay, that's me done. Thanks.
So, any other comments on the report itself? Okay. So, I think I understand this is. So, I believe, Tim, you're proposing an amendment. Is that correct?
We've presented some amendments in advance so that you could have them in writing, and I believe we can have a debate on that amendment before we vote on the full report.
Cam wanted to make a comment before we do that. Is that? Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So Tim, do you?
You want to talk before we move on to the amendments?
No, he said after. So Tim, do you want to say what you want?
Yeah, thanks. So 3 suggested amendments. One which we have raised fairly consistently since the budget, in fact, which is we do believe that we're out of step with other governance models in that our deputy leader has a kind of floating role within the system at the moment. So under the previous mayoral system, but also under cabinet and leader and cabinet models, the deputy leader of the council would have a policy portfolio, which we think is right, as it just give more of a focus to that role, so a primary focus to that role, and then they have deputy leader responsibilities on top. At the moment, nobody could quite say what the deputy leader actually does. We're not saying that the deputy leader doesn't do a lot. We're not making that point. We just think there should be a primary focus for the person who has that role, and then deputy leader as a secondary role on top of it, so that they can step in when necessary. And we have made a suggestion of various roles that the deputy leader of the council could have, but we've not picked any particular one because we think that would be a leader responsibility to decide as part of choosing their leadership group, if you like. But chair of the policy committee, chair of the finance subcommittee, which I think would be our preference because we think that's a really important role, and it would make sense for the deputy to have that role. But, or vice chair of strategy and resources, given that it is that is the overarching committee. So that's the first of our 3 amendments. I don't know whether you want to debate these all in one go, or whether you...
I would prefer if we dealt them collectively.
Okay. Yeah, so the second one is just in terms of the roles of the vice chair of policy committees. We do think that we need to pull out the sort of scrutinising role of this person. It's very clear across our committee structure at the moment. For instance, on the Transport Committee, we have a Green chair of the Transport Committee and a Tory vice chair who have extremely different views on many things within the transport world, and we just don't think it's realistic for that vice chair to step up into the role of the transport chair and make decisions if in the absence of that chair, because they would probably go completely against the decisions that the chair would make in that space. So we really think the vice chair role is more about scrutiny, asking the relevant questions. Have you thought about this? Are there alternatives to this? That's the clarity that we think the vice chair role ought to have. So that's the second amendment there. And the third one is just about whether the balance is right. We've had a year of the committee system now, and it's quite clear that some committees have a much heavier workload than others at the moment. So we're not sure that the balance is exactly right there between the division of of responsibilities within those committees, and we're suggesting that now we've had a year, that gets looked at by a task and finish group, and maybe they can come up with recommendations on whether we can rebalance that work a bit. So those are the three amendments we're proposing.
Okay. So colleagues are aware. So there's the first amendment relates to the role of the deputy leader, the second amendment to the role of the vice chair, and the third to a review of the work balance of responsibilities between each of the policy committees. Tim has proposed those three amendments. I've been reminded of a procedural point that the amendments need a seconder. I had understood that Councillor Blenkinsop was going to do that, but he isn't here at the moment. So I have to ask who would like to second the amendments that have been made. So in the interest of debate, I will second them. I have, so that the debate takes place in the way that's been requested, because I can't see any other alternative.
Sorry. Do we know where Councillor Blenkinsop is? Did he let you know that he was...
He has had an emergency. He's had to deal with.
Yeah, so apologies, he's not here.
Yeah. So, who would like to comment first? Cam.
So, I do think this is a misuse of the system. I think the purpose of what we're here to do today is to review it in terms of compliance with our statutory requirements, any legislation, and for what Tim did earlier around the wording, making sure it makes sense. I don't think it's for us to come here and subvert what's happened over 9 months with many meetings to come to an agreed position on what's presented to us here today and to go forward to full council. I think that's, to be honest, I think it's a bit embarrassing for Labour to come and bring this for us today. And I personally, there's things I'd like to see different, and I'm sure there's things many people would like to see different about the specific wordings of the Constitution and what's been included in this report. But the point is, it's an agreed position through cross-party over those meetings, and I just don't think it should be coming. This amendment should be coming today.
If I didn't say that clearly at the beginning, I asked a similar question, and my understanding is that the process is for recommendations from the group to come to the audit committee as a proposal. The committee book review group isn't the committee, and therefore it can't make recommendations directly to council. It has to come through a committee. It's going to come through this committee. That means that it is a recommendation. Those recommendations are amendable. Now that doesn't. I think that's just a matter of the Constitution. The point that the points that you've made, you've made very clear.
Yeah, that's a technicality. It's I think in terms of the right way of working with something is through those committee model review working groups that have gone on for months and months. It's not for us to come in at the last minute and say, I think this should be different or that should be different.
So, Ed.
Thank you. I 100% agree with Cam, and I'm just going to point to something that Tim said earlier, which was that what we're doing here today is discharging an assurance role. And I really don't see how making 3 substantive amendments to the content of this, substantive amendments to roles within the council, has anything to do with an assurance role. The comment that you made earlier really was discharging an assurance role, because you highlighted an issue with the text. There is a key difference between that and introducing entirely new content. And I'll pick on something that you did say, Tim, about the role of the deputy leader. And so I am just going to give you some clarification on what the role of the deputy leader is, because I think most people do have a good understanding of that. So let's take the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister. I'm sure you'll be familiar with who they are. Yesterday, the Prime Minister went to Scotland to have a meeting with the President of the United States. In the meantime, the Deputy Prime Minister deputised for him at number 10 Downing Street to welcome the Lionesses back when they brought football home. I think the general public have a very good understanding of what the difference between a leader and a deputy leader is and what functions they hold. And similarly, when it comes to vice chairs, it would be a clear expectation of most members of the public that the vice chair is there to discharge responsibilities when the chair is unable to do so. You highlighted an instance from another committee where there was a Green chair and a Conservative vice chair. That incident did actually take place last year. There was a committee that I substituted on where the vice chair took on the chairing role and the meeting went okay. So it is quite possible for that to take place. We're in a committee system. We are meant to be working cross-party in that committee system, and so the public expects us to discharge our responsibilities in that manner. I've got nothing to add on the third amendment. I'm not sure what it really adds in terms of content, other than calling for a task and finish group, which could just be called for at any other time anyway. But I think it's a highly inappropriate use of the process. If a political motion needs to be made to amend this, that can be done at full council when it has to go for final approvals anyway. This is a regulatory committee, and I think it's a misuse.
Did we have a comment from Nick?
Thank you. Yes, I'm finding it hard to get too excited about this, given the entire committee system is due to be eliminated by central government in an extraordinary exercise of centralising power. I just want, because we are here and we are in scope, this is an amendment which has been made and authorised, and we are debating it now. I did want to ask a question about the deputy role, because I understand that the Deputy Prime Minister also has a job of being Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. I wanted to ask Tim O'Gara about the way that our SRA rules work around having two jobs on the council and whether you would get paid for both of them.
I think the rule is you get paid for one of them.
So the short answer to that, Councillor Coombes, is that you can have two roles that command a special responsibility allowance, but the recommendation from the independent remuneration panel is that one SRA is paid, and that will be the one that commands the higher allowance.
So how does that work for the leader? I assume the leader gets paid more than an ordinary committee chair?
So the leader receives an SRA, which will be paid by full council as the allowance for the leader of the council. The leader does not receive a separate allowance as the chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee. However, it is envisaged in the roles and responsibilities for the leader of the council that they are the chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee. So it's in effect embedded in the allowance that they receive.
So if the deputy leader were to be given a committee responsibility, then there may be a consequence in terms of special responsibility allowances at the next sort of regrading, but not immediately.
Yes, so if we changed materially the role of any councillor in receipt of a special responsibility allowance by adding additional responsibilities in, then that is something that we would need to review with the independent remuneration panel and bring recommendations back to the council, which is ultimately responsible for setting member allowances.
Did you have a comment, Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. Regardless of what I personally think of the amendments, whether I agree with them or whether I disagree with them, I do feel rather uncomfortable with effectively approving the rewrite of large parts of a document which has already been through the committee model review group. I don't feel as though it's right for me to do that on this committee. I might agree with the amendments or I might disagree with the amendments, but I just don't feel it's my place to approve the rewriting of large parts of the document.
Thank you, Jonathan. Ellie, did you?
Well, it's not often that I agree with, but yes, I agree. But I also wanted to highlight the fact that this talks about reconvening, essentially reconvening a task and finish group which has done its work and finished and reported, and I don't quite understand how that works. Like, does this mean that all the other task and finish groups could be asked to reconvene? I mean, it becomes a kind of, how long is a piece of string? You set up a task and finish group for a specific purpose. That purpose has been fulfilled. I can't see how it or why it should be reconvened when it's finished what it was setting out to do.
Thank you. So I think that's everyone's had the opportunity to comment. So I think we should vote on those things. So I understand that we need to vote on those 3 amendments 3 times. Interesting to see how different they are. Amendment 1 relating to the role and responsibilities of the deputy leader. Votes in favour? Votes against? And abstentions? So that amendment is defeated. Amendment 2 relating to the role of vice chairs of the vice chair reporting committee. Votes in favour? And votes against? And any abstentions? I believe that to be the same. And Amendment 3 relating to the retasking of the committee Cllr review group relating to the responsibilities between the policy committees. Votes in favour? And votes against? Okay, thank you very much. So we revert to the original proposal as stated in the original recommendation. I propose that we... sorry, what happened there? That's tremendous. He's an absolute diamond. So the question now... So, Tom, for your update, we've just dealt with the amendments. So we are now voting on the original amendment, or the original recommendation unamended. Who would like to propose that recommendation is not? You would like to propose that? Who would like to second that, Ed? So could we have votes in favour of that recommendation? And any votes against or any abstentions? So that recommendation is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Shall we try and deal with the annual report of the Ombudsman? Is that something we can do? Yeah? So this... Yeah. Yeah, okay, so let me ask that. I know that... Right. I know that a number of people need to leave at 5 o'clock. But I don't think that we can deal with the social housing issue substantially in 5 minutes. That feels like quite a complicated issue. So the options relating to that is that we ask Richard to deal with that by himself if he's able to stay, if enough of the committee are able to stay, or that we defer that to the following meeting. Sorry, do you have a comment there?
Sorry, Chair, the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman report.
No.
No.
I'm sorry, I should have said. I've been informed that a number of people pertinent to agenda item 14 need to leave in the next 5 minutes. And I don't think it's possible to deal with that recommendation, that report, within those 5 minutes. And therefore we have to stay later to do that if enough of the people, including Richard, are able to stay there, or we would have to defer that to the next meeting. But I hope you've had a lovely afternoon.
Thank you. It's been very interesting. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sonia Thursland. I'm the Executive Director for Housing and Landlord Services. Chair, if it's all right, I think we would welcome a reasonable review of this deep dive into the risk, given the substantial nature of it. So if it's all right with the committee, we'd be happy to be rescheduled and to attend the next meeting if the agenda would allow it.
That honestly would be my preference. And that we defer whatever we would have done as a deep dive at that point. I think I would prefer to do that so that we give that enough time. Is that the view of the rest of the committee? That's tremendous, and I feel like apologising for Richard for wasting a lot of his time. I hope you have your laptop with you. Brilliant, thank you. The annual report, the local government and social care ombudsman, however, we are going to deal with. Hang on a second. So I believe this is being introduced by Ben.
Thanks, Chair. So Ben Hugin, Head of the Information Governance Service. So the annual report for the local government and social care ombudsman for 24-25, the reports for noting by the committee before going on to full council. Excuse me. So I'd just like to point out that there's a change from previous years. In previous years, we would have received a personalised letter from the Ombudsman, whereas this year, a generic letter has been sent to all local authorities with a caveat that later on, i.e. July 9th, those authorities with exceptional practice or where concerns are raised would receive a separate second letter. Not all organisations would get a letter, and just to confirm that we didn't receive any follow-up letter, and also we've been unable to determine how many other local authorities did receive a letter, either positively or negatively. Just also to point out, this is earlier in the year than usual. Normally this is going to Audit Committee in September. And then just by way of a few updates from me, the two service areas that have had the highest number of upheld cases are split between education and adult social care, both with 9 each. And then finally, just say there's a growing pressure on the complaints team, not in relation to the local government and social care housing side of complaints, but the housing side of complaints that they also deal with. So we are putting processes in place to increase our resource to adequately deal with both sides of the complaints processes that we deal with, and we have retained our externally verified or externally audited ISO certification in complaint handling for a 10th year running. So that was all the bits I wanted to highlight.
Okay, thank you, Ben. And do we have any comments from members on this item? Ellie.
Sorry, I'm going to keep it short because I know we all want to go. I found the spreadsheet with all the different authorities and their rates really interesting. I wondered whether that could, in future, when you do a similar report, whether we could use some of that to understand kind of where we fit in that. I had a little play with it and I could see that we were kind of in the top section of that, but obviously understanding how we compare with other similar authorities, perhaps understanding kind of per head what that breakdown is, just so that we have a sense of, is this something that we are concerned about? Is it something that I know it's very hard to unpick, is it because there's a lot going on? Is it because we have a very transparent complaints process so people know how to do it? Just having a bit more context would be really helpful in future. Thank you.
That's fine. Happy to take that away for next time.
You don't have an impression over our comparisons to peers and councils?
Only the comparisons that are in there around kind of upheld complaints compared to other local authorities and how we're kind of compared nationally, that the Ombudsman provide us no further insights, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think just to clarify, I think part of what you were trying to say there, Eddie, was that when we have a list of 300 local authorities, it's hard to draw meaningful comparisons with authorities that maybe are similar in nature. I'll pick up Baber District Council as it's another green-held authority. I see they've got a very low number of complaints, but there is no meaningful, there's nothing meaningful I can say in comparison with Baber District Council to Bristol City Council because they're contextually entirely different. So I think that's the substantive point here.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, really, regarding the cost, I guess, of resolving some of the complaints. I noticed that there's been a number of payments made, and to compensate complainants. So that obviously tots up to a certain figure. I didn't add it all up. There are thousands there involved. And I noticed as well that there are going to be 2 additional, perhaps, members of staff recruited. Is there maybe a trade-off between those two? Might you expect the 2 new staff to perhaps lead to a reduction in the level of complaints upheld and therefore the financial cost of compensating the complainants?
Potentially. It's too hard to tell at the moment. I think some of the compensation is as a result of the things that the service areas have done rather than the complaints process itself, or we've been instructed by the Ombudsman to offer compensation. Obviously we can't do anything about that. What we will hopefully see with the additional resource is a reduction in the compensation we're having to pay due to our delays in the complaints process. So that's where we should hopefully see some trade-off between the increase in staff and the compensation we are paying.
David.
Thank you, Chair. Next time we get this report, I do believe we mentioned it last time we received this report, can we have a link to the spreadsheet that's actually published on the LGO's website so that we can look at these data in Excel, as opposed to having gazillions of blank pages to scroll through the report and actually no means of actually correlating the rows and columns to what their data should actually contain? I think that would make it much easier to understand and accessible, not just for us, but also for the general public.
That's fine. So just to say that there is a link in the report that takes you to the Ombudsman's website, specifically for Bristol, where you can then access all of that data. But I will take away, is there a better way we can kind of link directly to the Excel versions itself?
Tim and then Tom.
Yeah, thanks. Just a small comment. I think it would be really useful if we could have a summary of where multiple complaints relate to the same thing. So say if there are more than 10 complaints that are all related to send, it would be really useful to know that because you can't, without going through them all and counting them all up, which I appreciate somebody would have to do, but not one of us in the committee. That'd be really useful. There are obviously going to be a lot of individual ones that you don't want to know one of this, one of that, but where there are, say, 10 or more, it would be useful to know if they relate to the same subject.
Okay, I think that's a good feedback for next time.
So I would certainly echo Councillor Wilcox's point. I did take a quick look at the data and some of the points around. I don't think I tried to do some very quick comparison to us in the core cities. I don't think we're especially out of the ordinary. I think that dubious dishonour unfortunately goes to Birmingham, which has a lot higher in terms of the complaints than the rest of the core cities. But one thing I do note is that while I don't think we have an excessive number of education and children's services complaints in the core cities department, I do notice that a number of the ones where we have been upheld have been on that. And I am aware that our performance when it comes to EHCPs is less than ideal. So I did want to ask whether or not we had been allocating any additional resources to looking to those complaints in particular, because I think we will or may expect to receive more of those in the future.
I think that's Councillor, that's one for me to take away and discuss with the service area directly, rather than for me to try and answer on their behalf.
Fair enough, but yes, that would be good to discuss, I think.
As a member of Children and Young People's, I can give you a little bit of insight into. So Vic Verma, in fact, today sent round an email about the EHCP improvement plan, which is addressing the huge challenges that we've got in that area, not least because it's been 34% around that increase in plans being asked for, let alone kind of how we manage to process them. And he's got some very clear things that he wants to do to tackle that, which I don't know how far that will be circulated, just checking where it went to. It went to all of us, actually. So hopefully that will obviously reduce the number of complaints that come through that route. That's part of what he's trying to address.
So I did spot that earlier, and I agree, it's very good news. I just think that while that's being implemented, we should still be ready, because I think the percentage was dropping to about 3% on time. So I think we can expect, at least in the medium term, to get more complaints in that regard that we will have to uphold.
Did you have a question, John?
Just a quick one, thanks, Chair. Yeah, like everybody else, I tried to do some comparisons with other authorities, and I looked at Bristol compared to Liverpool and Sheffield, but I wondered if I was actually looking at, well, if I was making a valid comparison, because of course Liverpool sits within the Merseyside Metropolitan Authority, and Sheffield sits within the South Yorkshire Metropolitan Authority, so it could be that Bristol City Council, being a unitary authority, doesn't, maybe has more functions that it carries out. But I found on one of the tables, the complaints upheld comparison with similar authorities to be quite useful. Complaints upheld for Bristol was 83%, for similar authorities 80%. I don't know which authorities were classed as similar to Bristol in that sense, but that seems to indicate that in terms of complaints upheld, we're not wildly out of line with other authorities.
Thank you. Yes. I don't think our powers are massively different to Liverpool or Sheffield, but I'm good. Let's not go into that territorial black hole at the moment. Thank you, everyone. I had one constitutional thing to check, Tim. The recommendation on the paper is to note the contents and to refer it to full council for consideration. Does it constitutionally have to go to full council?
Yes, we are. We're obligated to report this to full council, so it's here for as part of the decision pathway to full council. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I recommend that we do that. Everyone happy that we do that? That's great. There's one item remaining, which is for Aldo to comment on the current state of the corporate risk register. I'd say again, we have kept people slightly longer than expected, so if anyone can't stay, I imagine that fairly non-contentious, but I would like to deal with that item if we can. Over to you.
Sure. The report gives a state of play as of the 10th of June in terms of the corporate risks. Now, I think it's important to stress that the nature of the report is very much assurance over the process. It's not the risks themselves, which comes back to some of the earlier discussion previously. So I think one of the main things that comes out of the report is around the one critical risk out of the 17, which was corporate risk 60, which is the agenda item that's now been moved. But there's three improving risks, which corporate risk 15, corporate risk 30, corporate risk 64, which again indicates that the mitigations that have been put in place have taken effect, the controls are improving the risk, and therefore the exposure is reduced. The one deteriorating risk is Cllr 61, which has gone from a score of 9 to 15. There's no proposed risks for escalation, and interestingly there's a number of materialised risks that have come to fruition. This is where the risk would exceed the threshold of likelihood and impact, so basically it means it's happening, or it's 99% likely it's going to happen. So these would then be moved away from the risk register and be managed through normal management activities, dealt as issues. I think a wider point around the report itself, it's very, very text heavy, and it's not the easiest report to read. So again, I think what you'll see next committee going forward is a different format, and certainly more focus on the management of the risks rather than the process itself.
Okay, thank you. I was going to ask about CDM. My instinct is it's relatively unusual for a risk to... It's relatively common for likelihood to change. Yeah. If there's things that you've done in mitigations to reduce the likelihood of something happening, ideally. It's relatively more uncommon for the severity to increase. So what's happened to make that happen.
The severity to increase. Again, I suppose the context with all these corporate risks is obviously that internal control versus external control in terms of if it's external factors that have influenced it, then obviously it's beyond our control, hence why severity may have gone up or decreased. Okay. You probably have one to Joe.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions, really. I suppose they are questions, but you know, I'm not expecting answers. They're just observations as well, really. One of the things that I'm missing and that I was looking for was the strategic objectives that these risks, which are, after all, in the Corporate Risk Register, are threatening. And I can see that we've got, you know, strategic theme on these, on each of the risks. But to me, that isn't really, well, you know, it's useful to know, but I think we need, I would want to see the strategic objective, the measurable strategic objective that we have in our 25-30 plan, is it? That is being threatened by these risks. That's the first point. The second point is about the mitigating actions. I'm finding those titles, the action titles, they're extremely brief, and there isn't a lot of specifics in there to sort of enable us to consider, are those actions going to deal with the risk and reduce it possibly? So that's just my other point. So maybe a bit more specifics or even metrics around those action titles and the mitigating actions, I think would benefit the register. Thank you.
So certainly in the revised policy, there'll be more reference to the strategic objectives being part of the Corporate Risk Register, and some of the proposals that were put forward around the reporting format, again, will draw out mitigations in terms of making it more meaningful, measurable, etc.
Thank you. The impacted risks that you mentioned are obviously unfortunate because we don't like bridges collapsing or failure to meet statutory duties, but they are also an opportunity to check whether the system is working, because all of risk management is about uncertainty. Well, when a bridge falls down, you've got certainty. So that's an opportunity for us to look back on the process and say, did the risk register alert us to this possibility? And did we do every mitigation that we could? Looking at the register for 51 and 58, they're still marked as being likely rather than very likely, which is odd if in a different part of the report we've said it's already happened. So I don't think we've got that acknowledgement that the risk has impacted within the register. Could you tell us a little bit more about how we decide that a risk has impacted, and if we then use that to review how we record the risk?
So, I think this goes back to one of the previous points around the risk ownership in terms of the scope and the governance around changing certain metrics, and obviously then just becoming fact. So again, as part of the policy review and refresh, the governance within there will take care of those sorts of things. So if somebody's proposing a change in likelihood or impact, it will go through more of a sense check than it perhaps does at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to give my impressions of what Appendix A1 is telling us and the general public. To me, it's telling me that there are 18 risks that we are evaluating, the majority of which have had absolutely no change in status. Now, I can understand that there is a change in paradigm here in terms of how we evaluate risk and how we are doing risk, but what message does this send to the general public that we are actually dealing appropriately with risk and actually challenging the things that actually are causing these risks, please?
So again, I think part of the challenges around this, the focus has very much been on process rather than management of risk. So at the recent CLB meeting, we've proposed a refresh of the corporate risk, so again to ensure that we're capturing the appropriate risks for the environment that we operate in. I think in terms of going forward, the scrutiny will be on movement of risks, so effectiveness of management, effectiveness of mitigations, controls in place, are there the right controls, etc. So there will be much more focus on that going forward. The dynamism that we touched upon earlier in terms of that enterprise type approach, we will expect to sort of see movement, albeit the corporate risks. The risks themselves you wouldn't imagine would change a huge amount quarter to quarter because of their very nature, but actually the actions and the progress, that's what we should be seeing in terms of, well, in this quarter X, Y, Z has taken effect and it's reduced the likelihood, or it hasn't, and therefore through a deep dive explain why it's not taken effect.
Just to bring this to life a little bit, I just wanted to touch on the Cllr 12 emergency planning response risk, given that we had a bomb threat in my ward last week, which weirdly I'm still recovering from. I think that was a classic case of where things didn't quite work. There's obviously reviews happening, there's a lot of discussion happening around it and how to make it easier next time. We had 200 people evacuated for an unspecified amount of time, which ended up being from about 7 o'clock at night till 3 in the morning. And there are a number of issues came up during the night. They did get addressed. If this, I think you're right on the money saying we need to really think about what we are doing to actually mitigate, because a lot of this stuff that's being talked about here I'm not sure would have made a massive difference the other night. You know, the things that came up and not being identified, that's very much structural stuff. It's about staffing. I mean, some of it, yes, definitely, but there are some really basic things that are not even mentioned in here. So I think your point of like really thinking about what this means on the ground is really important, and I'm really pleased that you're refocusing in that way.
And I think just to sort of come back on the enterprise point again, so again, the example there were, it's not just about the risk register, actually it's about linking in incident management plans, business continuity plans, bringing those into the risk space, so yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, unless I've missed it, I couldn't see any reference to the City Lead project in the risk register. It's obviously a huge project. Presumably there's some risk attached to it. I just wondered why it wasn't there.
So again, the alignment between sort of corporate process and the projects and programmes space, that's something where there has been a gap previously. So again, trying to sort of draw in those and reflect those in the corporate register. That hasn't been as effective. But again, going forward, that's part of policy refresh.
Just to add to Jonathan's point, I think it's the thing about the City Leap from a risk management perspective is I think as members of the audit committee, we don't feel like we know whether this risk is material to the council or not. And it may be because it isn't. It may be because that issue has been dealt with incredibly professionally, and there's no residual risk to the council. It doesn't need to be there. In which case, it's appropriate that it isn't. But that's kind of the inference. But I don't think we feel 100% confident that that inference is correct, and that if there is some residual risk, maybe there is. Probably there should be. Is it material? We don't really know. So I think it would be. I think the question is, when this comes back, is it possible to identify whether that risk is significant enough to be registered? And if the answer is that that's been professionally assessed and it's not material, then that's great. But then we know that. But at the moment, we feel like we don't really know that. Sorry, could comment further, John.
Yes, that's right, Chair. I think that I think it was at Audit Committee effectiveness session that we mentioned that we felt that we didn't have the necessary oversight of City Leap to be able to judge what the consequences of the failure of the project would be. And from a governance perspective, I feel uncomfortable about that, being on the audit committee. And we did ask for a briefing to be arranged so that we could actually understand the risks associated with City Leap and what the consequences would be of the failure of the City Leap project, because I don't think we have visibility of that.
Chair, I can confirm that I have returned to John Smith, the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration. So yes, we arrange that for the committee.
So I think it would be something we should add to our action list to say that that request has been made. Thank you very much, Aldo. That's been fascinating. Oh yes, of course.
Just a couple of very brief comments, if I may, Chair. Just on the City Leap point, but one other point that was raised also in terms of the City Leap joint venture arrangement. Obviously, there will have been all the risks will have been identified and built into the original decision around that, and there will be individual project risks that are being managed on a project basis in line with our risk management framework. Given the commercial nature of that arrangement, I don't think it would be appropriate to bring a public report about that, but I'm assuming Simba's thinking about a confidential briefing. And then on the other point that was raised a little earlier, just to reiterate, clearly you had the limited assurance report around our risk management framework, but as Andy Rodney mentioned when he was here earlier, we are establishing a risk and audit board as part of our corporate leadership team, a refresh of our internal governance arrangements. And a part of that board, as Simba will confirm, we had the discussion at the corporate leadership team only this morning, will be to really drive that ownership around risk and having clear risk owners, putting that framework in place, really moving that limited assurance to a reasonable assurance level in short order, and to really champion from the senior leadership team downwards the importance of risk management and ensuring that risks are properly identified, owned, and those mitigations are clearly articulated and being driven through the various parts of the council business. So I just wanted to make that observation as a member of the senior leadership team, just to give the committee a little bit further insight. Thanks.
That's generated a tremendous amount of interest, which I'm very relieved about. Ed?
I will keep this really brief, but I'm really surprised to hear that we feel that it isn't appropriate to bring matters related to City Leap and effective scrutiny of the risks that affect that to this committee, given the massive financial value of that project and the massive impact it can have and hopefully will have on our city in positive ways. But the risks in that are highly significant, so I find it baffling to hear that.
I kind of don't want to speculate more, but I think the issue is there is definite demand for that briefing. And when we've had that briefing, actually, if and when we know something or we feel more comfortable about what that risk is, then we might want to discuss what forum we talk about it in. But I think if the action of can we identify that in a members' briefing, I think there is tremendous interest in, and we should definitely do that. And if we haven't done it by the next meeting, then you should remind us about it, because that is definitely something that we need to do. David.
Thank you, Chair. I believe you mentioned a risk performance board. What was the name of the board you talked about that was newly created?
Risk and audit board.
Risk and audit?
Audit, yes.
So who's going to be on that board, please?
base. It will be chaired by the Chief Executive with other members of the corporate leadership team supported by our Chief Internal Auditor and other senior officers as necessary.
So it will be officer-led and no member involvement at all.
It's a management forum.
So we wouldn't be expecting the Chair of Audit to be also on this board who has a responsibility for risk.
No. Remember that the standards have clear roles and responsibility for management and the members. So the audit committee exercises the member role through this meeting. The audit and risk board is a management board that is responsible for leading providing strategic leadership, creating tone at the top, and creating a robust culture for improving control, effective governance, and risk. So it's purely for management. Remember that we also have separate conversations with management before we come to the audit committee. So that's operational management, but this is purely assurance. So you wouldn't expect the chair of the audit committee, to be in that operational. It's just a management function. It's just changing from CLB routine into a CLB that is dedicated to deal with audit and risk issues.
Will this committee see any of the outputs of that board?
I suspect the job of the committee is to test the internal control environment. So we arguably assess the impact of that board and the impact that it's had on the risk that we manage, but I don't think that we oversee the means of operations. I think that's true. Any more comments before we?
Would you like to represent members on that board, if given the opportunity?
I don't think I have that opportunity. I think I've been told fairly elegantly that I'm unwelcome. But we'll see how that model changes. But thank you very much. I'm overwhelmed with your spirit of generosity. And on that tone, Ed, I'd like to draw the meeting to a conclusion. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for attending.